Hey there and welcome back. If you are settled now, lights low, the day finally loosening its hold on you, then you are exactly where you need to be. Tonight is the kind of evening that asks nothing of you at all. It only asks that you let yourself be taken somewhere, and that you let it be somewhere beautiful. This is for anyone who has carried a long day on their shoulders and would like for a few hours to set it down inside another century. I would like to take you to a place, not a museum, not a ruin, but a house in the full pride of its first winter, when the paint was barely dry on its ceilings, and the family who built it were about to throw open its doors to the most discerning city in the world. You do not have to follow every name or hold every date. Let them drift past you the way faces drift past at a party you are not obliged to join. Let the present fall a little further behind with each breath you take. Because before this night is over, we will climb a staircase to a small upper room whose walls were painted, in secret, to hold a secret of their own. The man and woman who built this place had married once in private, a week before they married in public, and somewhere upstairs that hidden first wedding was written into the very plaster, in a language only the two of them would have fully understood. We will find the chamber where they kept it. Before we step inside, I want to say one thing, and then I will not interrupt the night again until the very end. If these candlelit journeys into the past are something you would like to find your way back to on another night, you are always welcome to subscribe, and the place will be here waiting whenever you need it again. I always like to know where in the world you are listening from, and what the hour is where you are, whether it is rain against a dark window or the last warm hour of a long summer. Leave it below if you feel like it. I look through them often, and I find there is something companionable in knowing that on this same night, across so many time zones and so many quiet chambers, a good many of us are stepping into the same old house together, in from the same imagined cold. That is all I will ask of you. Now let us go in. Picture this. It is a little after 7 in the evening, late in the winter of 1766, and you are standing at the edge of Green Park in London, looking across a wide stretch of black grass toward a long wall of lit windows. The cold here is the wet mineral cold of a London winter, the kind that works into the seams of a coat and settles into them and stays. It is not a dramatic chill. It is a patient one. It has been working into the city all day, and now, well after dark, it has the streets to itself. Behind you the park falls away into proper darkness. It is unlit and only half tamed at this date, more field than garden, and somewhere out in it you can hear rather than see the slow movement of cattle, for they still graze the royal park and will go on doing so for years yet. There is none of the glow you would expect of a great city at night. Only a scattering of oil lamps along the far roads, and beyond them the deep, breathing black of a London that goes properly dark the moment the sun is gone. And then, rising out of all that blackness directly ahead of you, there is one bright thing. A long facade of pale stone, every window of its upper floors burning gold from within, standing against the night like a lantern. Someone has set down at the edge of the fields. You find, without deciding to, that you are walking toward it. Carriages are drawn up all along the road in front of the building. Their own lamps burn at the corners, little points of flame held in glass boxes, and the horses stand steaming in the cold, shifting their weight, breathing out long clouds that drift sideways and vanish. There is the smell of them, and of damp stone and of pitch smoke all at once. Each carriage that arrives is its own small event. It draws up, and a footman steps forward, and the door is opened, and the steps are let down, and out comes a guest in all their evening finery, lifting a hem clear of the wet cobbles, pausing for a moment on the threshold of the night before, hurrying toward the light of the open door. The horses are walked on, the carriage drawn aside to wait, and the next one comes forward in its turn. It is a slow, stately, endless procession, and it has been going on for the better part of an hour, and the whole street has the feeling of a tide coming in, carriage after carriage delivering its small cargo of silk and warmth into the glowing house. Between the carriages move the linkboys, the boys hired by the hour to light a gentleman's way through the unlit streets. Each one carries a torch of pitch and tow that streams sideways in the wind, and the light they throw is restless and leaping, skidding across the wet cobbles and up the front of this place and away again. By that uneven glow you begin to make the building out. Spare a thought, even now, for those boys. They are children, most of them, poor children, out in the bitter cold for the hours of the evening, earning a few coins by carrying fire ahead of the rich. They will stand and wait in the freezing dark while their betters are warm inside, and walk them home again at the end, and that is their whole night's work. They are the very edge of the bright world we are about to enter, the place where the warmth runs out and the cold begins, and they hold their torches up against it, and they are part of this evening too, though no one inside will think of them once. The stone of the mansion is the colour of old cream. It was brought down by sea and river, all the way from the quarries of Dorset, which was no small undertaking, and you are meant to know it. The front is built in the grave old manner of Rome, a row of attached columns marching across the upper story above an arcaded base, the whole thing composed so that it reads less like a London house and more like a temple that has somehow walked into the heart of the city and decided to stay. High along the very top of the roofline, almost lost against the black sky, 3 carved figures stand watch. You would miss them if a torch did not happen to throw its light up that far. They are Ceres, the goddess of corn and harvest, Bacchus, the god of wine, and Flora, the goddess of flowers. They were set up there for one purpose. They are a promise, made in stone to everyone who arrives below them, that inside this mansion there will be plenty, and there will be welcome, and there will be beauty. You have arrived at Spencer House, and the evening is only beginning. There is a strangeness to the front of this building that you might not catch at first, and then will not be able to stop seeing once you have. It is not quite symmetrical. The eye, looking at a grand London front, expects perfect balance, one side answering the other. This front does not give it. The family who built the house could never quite buy the last narrow strip of ground they needed on one flank, and so the matching pavilion they had planned was simply never raised. There is something almost human in that, I have always thought. A noble house at the very summit of fashion and wealth, wearing a small permanent defeat in full public view, and carrying itself for all that like the most assured thing on the street. The grandest of us are rarely as finished as we look from across the park. You came at the house across the grass rather than up through the lanes behind, and that was the right way to come, because the park front is the face the place chose to show the world. The other approach, in through the crowded warren of St. James's at the back, brings you to a plainer courtyard and a quieter door. That is the working face of the place. This side, ablaze above the dark grass, is the one built to be looked at. And at this hour, with every window lit and the cattle breathing somewhere in the blackness and the torches guttering below, it looks less like a private home than like a stage upon which something is about to begin. Which, in its way, it is. The man who built this house did not raise it merely to live in. He raised it to be seen living in, and tonight is one of the very nights it was made to hold. So we will not stand out here in the cold any longer than we must. Watch, now. The front door has opened. Makes a tall rectangle of gold in all that pale stone, and out of it a footman is already coming down the steps toward the nearest carriage, moving without hurry, his breath clouding, the light from inside spilling out behind him across the wet stone of the steps. The door has been opened for the people stepping down from that carriage. but it has been opened for us too. Come with me. We will go up the steps, out of the wind, and in. The first thing that meets you, before any room, before any face, before you have taken in a single beautiful object, is the heat. You have just come out of a London winter, and the entrance hall of Spencer House is as warm as a held breath. The fires here have been kept burning since the middle of the afternoon, banked and fed for hours on end, so that the very stone of the walls would lose its winter chill before the first guest arrived. After the wind off the park, the warmth is almost a physical pressure against the skin. For a moment you simply stand inside it the way you might stand in a patch of sun, feeling it work into your cold hands and your stiff face. And you feel, too, the days-long tension in your shoulders begin, just a little, to let go. This is the first kindness the building does you, and it is a deliberate one. You were cold, and now you are not, and the whole of the change happened in the single instant you crossed the threshold. There is a deep old magic in that crossing, in passing from the cold and the dark and the open night into the warmth and the light and the shelter of a grand house, and it is older than this house, and older than the city around it. It is the same relief our most distant ancestors felt coming in from the weather to the fire, the body's animal gladness at warmth and safety and walls. All the marble and the gold of this place are only the most refined possible expression of that ancient comfort. The fire in the cave dressed up in Portland stone and gold leaf. Strip away the splendour, and the feeling underneath is the simplest and most human one there is. You were out in the night, and now you are in, and you are safe, and you are warm. The hall itself is a calm and serious place, and it means to be. It does not try to overwhelm you the moment you arrive. That would be a kind of vulgarity, and this place, for all the fortune poured into it, is at endless pains never once to seem vulgar. So the hall holds you instead, in cool tones of grey and white, and in a measured repeating rhythm of columns. The architecture speaks to you in a low and even voice before the chambers beyond it ever raise theirs. The floor underfoot is stone, laid in a quiet pattern that your eye follows without your meaning it to. The colours around you are sober and grave. There is restraint everywhere, and the restraint is the point. The whole effect, very carefully built, is of having stepped through an ordinary door in London and out into the entrance of a building in ancient Rome. That is precisely the impression the men who designed this building laboured to achieve. You are meant to feel the city drop away behind you at this threshold. You are meant to understand, without anyone saying a word of it, that you have crossed into a more considered world than the one you left out in the dark. Footmen are everywhere and nowhere at once, which is the surest sign of a place run by people who know exactly what they are doing. They come for your cloak and your hat and your wet outer things with the smooth, trained discretion of their craft. That blankness of theirs is itself a high skill, learned over years. They relieve you of everything so quietly that you have scarcely decided to give it up before it is already gone, carried away into some side chamber to be kept dry until you want it again. They wear the deep colours of the family livery, and they have been on their feet since before dawn, and they will still be on their feet long after you have climbed back into a carriage and gone home. You would never once guess any of that from looking at them. Their faces give away nothing but a grave and pleasant attention, and already, from somewhere above you and ahead of you, there comes a soft tide of sound, the low murmur of many voices in conversation, and threaded through it, the first faint phrase of music. Your eye lifts toward it without your meaning it to. The mansion is doing to you, gently and exactly, the thing it was made to do. It is drawing you in. Before we go any deeper into the house, let me pause and tell you exactly where in the world you are standing, because the spot itself is part of the story, and the Spencers chose it with enormous care. You are in St. James's, the most fashionable corner of the most powerful city in Europe, and there is a reason every great family wanted a foothold here, and it has everything to do with the building that lies just a short walk up the road. That building is St. James's Palace, and in this age it is the working heart of the monarchy. The king holds his court there. To be received at court, to be presented, to be seen, you came to St. James's, and so the whole neighbourhood around the palace had grown, over the previous 100 years, into a dense and glittering huddle of the houses of the great, each family wanting to be near the throne, near the power, near the centre of everything that mattered in the kingdom. It had not always been so. Within living memory of the oldest people alive tonight, this had been the edge of things, a place of fields and a royal hunting ground. But proximity to a king is the most valuable thing in any age that has one, and so the fields had given way to mansions, and the lanes had filled with the carriages of the powerful, and a piece of ground that had once grazed deer now carried some of the highest rents in the world. So when John Spencer set out to build, this was where he had to build. A man of his fortune and his new rank could not have a London house in some lesser quarter. It would have been like a great actor refusing the chief theatre. He needed to be here, among his equals and his rivals, within sight of the palace and the park, where the people who counted would pass his door and see his windows lit, and know exactly what his house declared about him. And the particular genius of his site is that it faces the park. Most of the grand houses here are hemmed in by their neighbours, packed tight along the narrow streets, their grandeur turned inward to courtyards and gardens, because there is no outward view to be had. But Spencer House, alone among them, turns one whole magnificent face to the open green of the park, so that it has both things at once, the address that means everything, and a prospect of grass and trees and sky that most of its neighbours would have given a fortune for. It is the best of both worlds, the heart of the city and the edge of the country in a single building, and the Spencers knew precisely what they had. Step out of the front door on a clear day, in your imagination, and you could walk to the palace in a few minutes, past the doors of dukes and earls, through the most concentrated wealth and power in the land. Or you could turn the other way and be among grazing cattle and open grass, with the city at your back. To live here was to live at the exact seam where the great world and the green world met, and the house was built to make the most of standing precisely on that line. Now, before we follow that thread of music up into the light, come down with me for a moment instead, just briefly, into the one part of this mansion that no guest was ever meant to see, because the serene evening you are about to be folded into is being made, this very minute, beneath your feet, and it seems only fair to look once at the people making it. A narrow service stair takes us down, and with every step the character of the place changes around you. The cool calm of the hall falls away behind us. The air grows thicker and hotter and louder, and then you come out at the bottom, and you have left the temple entirely and walked into something closer to the engine room of a ship under full sail. The cold of the park is unimaginable here. The heat comes at you in a single wall, the heat of a long range of open fires burning along one side of the space. And with the heat comes the smell of the whole evening laid bare into its separate parts, roasting meat and wood smoke and dripping fat, the sweet heaviness of sugar being boiled and worked at a side table, the sharp green of herbs cut a moment ago, the yeasty warmth of bread under a cloth. It is a good deal to take in at once, and it is wonderful, and it is nothing at all like the spaces above. Before the fires, joints of meat turn slowly on long spits. Some are driven by weighted jacks that have to be wound up like a clock and run down through the party. One, in the corner, is turned by a small dog trotting endlessly inside a wheel set into the wall, a creature bred and trained for this single tedious task. You may decide for yourself whether to find it charming or a little sad. At the centre of all of it stands the cook. She holds the whole roaring room together the way a captain holds a deck in a gale, never raising her voice by much, never once still, her eye on 6 different things at the same time. Everyone else moves around her at a half run. And there are a good many of them, for a house like this is not so much a building as a small community, a whole population living and working beneath one roof. There is the cook and her kitchen maids and her scullery maids. There is the butler and the footman who serve above. There is the housekeeper who rules the female servants and the linen and the stores with as much authority in her sphere as any general. There is the steward over all the household accounts, the ladies' maids, the nurse and her nursery maids, the grooms and coachmen out in the stables, the boy who does nothing but clean knives and boots, and more besides, ranked and ordered in a hierarchy as precise and as jealously observed as the one playing out in silk and jewels in the interiors above. For there is a society below stairs every bit as intricate as the one above, with its own ranks and its own dignities and its own quarrels, its own sense of exactly who outranks whom and who must defer to whom. An upper servant would no more dine with a scullery maid than a duchess would with a shopkeeper. The great house, top to bottom, is a single elaborate machine for sorting human beings into their places and keeping them there, and the people below stairs believed in that order, mostly as firmly as the people above. The arithmetic of a night like this is staggering once you let yourself add it up. The candles alone, hundreds of them, that will burn upstairs tonight to make them shine, would cost more than a labouring family might see in a good many weeks of work, and they will be let to gutter down and quietly replaced without a second thought. The food is its own fortune. It has been brought in from the markets at first light, carted down from the family's own farms in the country, drawn out of cold larders where it has hung and salted and waited for days. Somewhere in the middle of it moves the steward, grave and unhurried, a book under one arm and a ring of keys at his belt. Among those keys is the one to the wine, for he answers to the family for every bottle that climbs the stairs. None of these people will be thanked tonight. Most of the guests above will never once think of them. They will eat and drink and admire and go home with no notion at all of the hot, sleepless world that made the magic possible. And yet take this away, this labour that has agreed to keep itself unseen, and the paradise upstairs would come apart within the hour. I find there is something worth holding on to in that. The way so much beauty rests always on work that has consented to stay out of sight. We will leave them to it now. They would not thank us for the watching, and the music is still rising overhead. Back up the narrow stair then, and into the quiet, and we will rejoin the evening properly, passing through into the first of the grand reception rooms of the building. This is the ante-room. The name is a plain one, and it tells you the interior's whole purpose. It is a between place, a held breath, a space whose entire task is to receive you, and to make you wait a little, and to make the waiting itself feel like a privilege rather than a delay. Here, by slow degrees, the sobriety of the entrance hall begins to give way. There is gilding now, used with care and not yet pushed to excess, catching the candlelight in thin bright lines along the edge of a cornice, around the frame of a door-case, in the carved border of a looking-glass. The walls have begun to take on colour as well, something deeper and richer than the grey below. You are being led, very deliberately, from the plain threshold of the everyday up toward the full splendour of the chambers still to come. The men who designed this place paced this ascent as carefully as a composer paces the opening bars of a symphony, holding the great sound back, letting it build, making you want it before they give it to you. Nothing here is an accident. Everything has been arranged to be felt in a certain order. The company gathers in this chamber in shifting knots and currents. This is where you would pause on first arriving, looking for the faces you already know, being found in your turn by the faces who wish to know you. There is a particular feeling to this early part of an evening that anyone who has ever arrived at a gathering will recognize across all the centuries. The slight bracing of the nerve as you come in, the quick sweep of the eye around the salon, the small relief of finding a friendly face, the small flutter of being approached. The Georgians felt every bit of it, under all their training, and the trained ease with which they hid it was itself the achievement. To walk into a crowded chamber and seem entirely at home there, when you might be inwardly uncertain, was the first lesson this world taught its children, and you can watch them all performing it now, beautifully, around you. And a surprising amount of the real business of an evening like this is done in exactly such a space, in the small interval before anyone has quite arrived anywhere or settled to anything. Marriages are weighed here, in glances and half-sentences. Reputations are taken out, turned over in the light, and quietly put away again. An invitation to some other fine house, the thing half the people present most want, can be won or lost in the tilt of a head or the warmth of a greeting. The talk runs light, and it is never only light. Underneath every pleasant word there is a current, and everyone in the room is reading it. And all the while the chamber itself keeps making its silent argument, in plaster and paint and thin lines of gold. It is saying that the family who raised it possessed not merely money, which is common enough at this height of society, but taste, which is rarer. And beyond even taste, the deepest luxury of all, which is the easy confidence to spend a fortune and make the spending look like nothing. Let the others stand and murmur a while. We are going to slip out through a side door, away from the gathering crowd, into a far quieter chamber. It'll tell you a good deal about the master of the mansion and about the mind that dreamed all of this up. This is the library, and it belongs to John Spencer more than any other room under this roof. A great public man builds his great public rooms for the world to come and admire. A more private man keeps somewhere like this for himself. It is lined floor to ceiling with books, lit more softly than the chambers made for show, and it smells of three things at once, of leather and of beeswax, and of the dry, faintly sweet scent of old paper that anyone who has loved books will know at once. The fire here is smaller and more companionable than the blazes elsewhere in the house. It does not roar, it settles, and the chairs around it are built to be sunk into for hours, not perched upon for the quarter of an hour between one dance and the next. If the rest of the house is a performance, then this is the space where the performer slips off his shoes and is for a while only himself. Every fine mansion has a space like this somewhere, if you know to look for it, and it is usually the truest room in the building. Let me tell you a little about the man whose room this is, because the whole place makes more sense once you know him. John Spencer came into his fortune absurdly young. He was a boy of 12 when the money came to him, the vast accumulated wealth of a family that had risen, generations back, out of the wool trade, and had been turning sheep into land, and land into influence ever since. And then a boy of 12 handed a kingdom of money. It is the sort of thing that ruins a good many people, and it did not ruin him, though it shaped him. He grew into a man who loved beautiful things, and who disliked, rather deeply, the rough and noisy business of public life that men of his rank were expected to throw themselves into. He would sit in Parliament, because that was expected. He would take the title of Earl when it came, in the year before the night we are visiting. But his heart was never in the council chamber or the division lobby. His heart was in rooms like this one, and in the place he was building around it. As a young man he had gone abroad, on the long journey down through France and into Italy that every wealthy Englishman of his sort was expected to make. They called it the Grand Tour. The idea was that a young gentleman would stand before the broken temples and the weathered marble of the ancient world, and come home with his taste refined and his understanding of the world made broader and deeper. For a good many of those young men, if we are honest, the whole undertaking was an expensive way to acquire a few paintings, a fondness for Italian wine, and some stories to tell at dinner. The tour could be a long and gilded holiday, and often was. Picture the journey, though, because it was a real adventure in an age when travel was slow and hard and genuinely dangerous. A young man set out from England with a tutor to guide and govern him, crossed the channel in a small ship at the mercy of the weather, and then made his way overland for weeks and months by carriage over rough roads, through France and over the Alps, those vast and forbidding mountains that travellers of this age regarded with real dread, and down at last into Italy. It might take years, the whole circuit. He would see Paris, and Rome, and Venice, and Naples. He would stand in the ruins of the old world, walk the streets being dug out of the ash at the buried cities, and see with his own eyes the wreck and the glory of an age he had, until then, known only from books. For an impressionable young man it could be overwhelming and life-altering, and many came home not quite the same as they had left. They had seen beauty on a scale that England could not show them. They had met a wider, older, more polished world. Some came back insufferable, full of borrowed opinions and foreign airs. But some came back genuinely changed, carrying a vision of beauty they would spend the rest of their lives trying to recreate in the cold northern country they had returned to. A few never came back at all, marrying abroad or dying of a fever in some Italian town far from everyone they knew. Most simply came back older and richer in pictures, and quietly altered by what they had seen. But for a few of them, and Spencer was one, it lit a fire that never afterwards went out. He looked at the ruins, and something in him answered. He came home changed, carrying a love of the ancient world that would cost him a fortune to express, and that he would spend the rest of his life expressing. The books that line this space are partly the residue of that journey. There are heavy folio volumes of engravings, the kind a man brought home from Italy with care, showing the columns and the pediments and the carved friezes of antiquity in fine, exact detail. And here is the thing worth noticing. Those engravings are not merely decoration, they are the source. The very forms drawn in these books, the Greek and Roman details copied so carefully by some engraver's hand, have been quoted and reworked and made new all through the building we are standing in. The griffins, the palms, the patterns on the ceilings overhead. They began here, on these shelves, as ink on paper. To stand in this interior, then, is to understand that the splendour all around you is not a rich man's passing whim. It is the patient working out of a real and serious love. He did not buy his taste by the yard from a fashionable shop in the way many of his neighbours did. He went and looked at the originals with his own eyes. He brought home what genuinely moved him, and then he found the cleverest designers in the kingdom and set them to translating what he loved into stone and plaster and paint, arranged around the ordinary daily business of his life. There is something quietly moving in that, when you sit with it a while. A man building, at enormous expense, a permanent and beautiful argument that the past was finer than his own present, and then choosing, every single day, to live inside the argument he had made, to wake up in it, to take his supper in it, to grow old in it. We could stay in here. On another night I might let us linger by this smaller fire until the candles burned low, but the music is louder now, out beyond the door, and the lower floor of this place has saved its real marvel for last. So come back out with me, past the murmuring company, toward a doorway from which the most extraordinary light in the whole building is spilling out across the floor. This is the palm room, and it is the single most astonishing thing the ground floor has to show you. Step into it, and your breath does some small involuntary thing before you have even decided to be impressed. The interior is not large, it is overwhelming all the same, because rising out of the walls on every side are columns carved into the shape of palm trees. Their trunks are ringed and scaled like the real thing. Their broad fronds spread upward and outward and meet across the ceiling overhead, so that you stand beneath a canopy of stone and wood made to look like leaves, and every surface of them, each frond and rib and stem, is sheathed in gold. Not paint pretending at the colour, true gold leaf, beaten finer than the thinnest paper you can imagine, and laid down by hand over the carved wood, leaf by patient leaf, until the whole grove gleams. The effect is that the salon seems to have grown up out of some warmer, brighter country, somewhere far to the south, and then frozen at the very instant of its flowering. It is a piece of the tropics, dreamed up in a cold city by men who had mostly never seen a real palm tree in their lives. And think for a moment of the sheer extravagance of it. The gilding is real metal, hammered out so impossibly thin that a tiny weight of it can cover a whole surface, and to gild an entire grove of carved foliage was to take a fortune in beaten metal and press it onto the wood by hand, leaf by leaf, purely so that it might catch the light. There is something almost dizzying in that, a treasure you could not put a price on because the price is, in a sense, the point. Riches made visible, money turned into brightness. And yet the effect is not vulgar, which is the miracle of it. It ought to be. By every reasonable measure, a chamber sheathed in beaten metal should be a monstrous thing. Instead, it is delicate and witty and somehow weightless, the gilding made to feel like sunlight rather than treasure. And here is what matters most about it. It was only ever meant to be seen the way you are seeing it now by the light of living flame. We tend to look at these chambers today under steady, even electric light, and they are beautiful, but they are also, in a sense, switched off. By candlelight, the gilding does not sit still. It stirs. Every flame in the chamber sets the gilded leaves quivering with reflected fire. The brightness slides and pools and runs along the carved fronds, never resting, so that the whole painted grove seems to move in a wind you cannot feel against your own skin. The space breathes. It is very nearly alive, and no one who saw it by daylight ever truly saw it at all. At the far end, framed by all that shining foliage, a shallow dome curves overhead, and within its hollow stands the pale figure of a goddess, cool and still and white against the surrounding blaze of gold. She is the calm centre of all that movement, the one thing in the interior that holds perfectly steady. The whole conceit, the family knew perfectly well, had been borrowed. It came from a fantasy dreamed up a century before, for the private bedchamber of a Stuart king, a royal paradise that was designed and drawn out in loving detail, and then, like so many royal dreams, never actually built. The Spencers took that unbuilt royal dream and made it real, in their own home for themselves. There is something splendid in that, and something a little cheeky too, and the salon knows it. For all its gold, the palm room is never heavy, never pompous. It is playful. It is a rich man's joke that happens to be a masterpiece. And underneath the play, as so often in this building, there is a private meaning folded in. The palm is an ancient emblem of married love, of fidelity and fruitfulness. The strange winged griffins worked into the carving are the heraldic beasts of the Spencer family itself. So the entire shimmering grove is, beneath its splendour, a quiet message about a marriage. This was the room, in the rhythm of a night, where the gentlemen would withdraw after dinner to their wine and their talk, while the ladies kept the spaces above. A masculine room, then, by use, and yet built around a symbol of married love. We still have not properly met the two people at the heart of all this gold. But notice, as we move on, that the mansion has been speaking of them since before we came in out of the cold. In its statues, in its palms, in its griffins, it keeps returning over and over to the same single subject, the love of the man and the woman who built it. Let us turn now to the walls, because there is something on them that the people of this evening prized as highly as the gold and the marble, and that we tend to walk past today without quite seeing it. The pictures. A noble house like this is, among everything else it is, a gallery. The largest of the reception rooms upstairs was built not only for dancing and receiving, but to hang paintings, and the family's collection runs all through the house, frame nearly touching frame, climbing the walls from a little above your head to the cornice far overhead. This is not how we hang pictures now. We give a single canvas a clean wall and a wide margin of empty space and a small light of its own, and we stand back from it as if at an altar. The Georgians did nothing of the kind. They hung their pictures close packed, large above small, the whole wall a dense mosaic of gilded frames, so that the eye had to work and rove and settle and rove again. The subjects, for the most part, would be familiar to anyone who had made the grand tour. Scenes out of the ancient world, gods and goddesses and old stories from the poets, landscapes of the Italian countryside, soft and golden and a little melancholy, painted to look as though the age of myth had only just departed and might return at any hour. And there would be portraits, of course. Ancestors in the stiff clothes of earlier reigns, looking down out of their dark grounds with the family's own features arranged on faces a century dead. To stand among them is to be quietly reminded, as you were meant to be, that this family did not begin yesterday, and does not intend to end. Here is the part we have lost, though, and it is worth slowing down for. All of these pictures were made to be seen by candlelight, and oil paint behaves in candlelight in a way. It simply cannot under the steady electric glare of a modern room. A flame is a living thing, and it makes the varnished surface of an old painting live with it. Move a candle slowly past a dark canvas, and the picture wakes. A face you had not noticed swims up out of a shadowed corner. A fold of red drapery catches the light and glows like an ember, and then goes dark again as the flame moves on. The pictures were never meant to be taken in all at once, flatly, the way a photograph is. They were meant to be discovered, a little at a time, as you carried your own small light along the wall, leaning in, finding the gleam of a pearl here, the wet shine of a painted eye there. Looking at pictures in this house was a slow and bodily thing. You moved, the light moved, the pictures moved with it. This is perhaps the single hardest thing for us to recover about how these people lived with beauty, and it is worth dwelling on, because it changes everything. We are used to seeing art held still under even illumination, every part of it equally visible, nothing hidden, nothing emerging. We take it in at a glance and move on. They could not do that. For them, a great dark canvas was an object that gave itself up slowly and partially, that withheld as much as it showed, that changed as you moved your candle, and changed again as the flame guttered, so that no two viewings were ever quite the same, and a picture you had owned for 30 years could still surprise you on the right dim evening. Beauty for them was something you courted, something you worked toward in the dim glow, something that revealed itself only to patience. We have gained a good deal with our bright, steady light, but we have lost that slow seduction of a picture seen by flame, and it was its own kind of richness, and it was a social act as much as a private one. A guest of any cultivation would be expected to stand before the better canvases and say a few words about them, to know the painter, to admire the handling, to murmur about a journey to Rome where one had seen the like. The collection was a kind of language, and fluency in it marked you as belonging to a certain world. There is a note I find a little wistful in all of it. A man could spend a fortune assembling beauty like this, and hang it where he passed it 100 times a day, and end by hardly seeing it at all, the way we stop hearing a clock we have lived with for years. The guests, the ones who came on an evening like this one and saw the interiors fresh, perhaps saw the pictures more truly than the family ever did. Beauty you own becomes furniture. Beauty you visit stays beautiful. There is a small lesson folded into that, I think, for all of us, and the house offers it without a word. And among all the pictures, there is one kind I want to single out, because it tells you something about how these people thought of themselves and of time, and that is the family portrait. For this is the great age of English portrait painting, perhaps the greatest there has ever been, and a family like this one lived right at the heart of it. The finest painters in the land were at work in London in these very years, and to sit to one of them was among the things such a household simply did, the way they built houses and made marriages. Think about what a portrait was for, in an age before any other way existed of fixing a face. There was no other means at all of preserving what a person looked like, none, save a painter's hand and eye. When you died, your face died with you, except as it lived on in the memory of those who had known you, and in whatever portraits you had managed to leave behind. A portrait was not vanity, or not only vanity. It was the single thread by which a face might reach across death to the people who came after. So a household commissioned portraits with real seriousness. The Earl and his Countess would sit separately or together, hour after hour, for the painter, holding a pose while the painter worked, catching not just the features but the bearing, the rank, the confidence, the whole performance of who they wished to be remembered as being. And the children would be painted too, fixed forever at an age they would soon outgrow, so that long after they were grown and gone the family could look up at the wall and see them small again. There was flattery in it, of course. A painter who wished to keep his grand clients learned to find the best in a sitter, to smooth the years, to lend a little grace that the mirror might not have granted. But the finest of them did something more than flatter. They caught something true, a particular tilt of the head, a particular look in the eye, so that the portrait became not just a record of a face, but a glimpse of a person. And across all the years you can still stand before one of these painted figures and feel with a small shock that someone is genuinely looking back at you. That is the strange power of the portraits hung through this house. The painted ancestors looking down are not decoration. They are an assertion, made in oil and gilt frame, that this family does not end, that it stretches back through all these solemn faces and will stretch forward through the children sleeping upstairs, but the name goes on. To hang your forebears on your walls is to say, every day I come from somewhere, I belong to something larger than myself, I am one link in a long chain. The guests understood it. They were meant to. And the family, surrounded by their own painted dead, were reminded of it too, every time they crossed the chamber. I find there is a quality both grand and touching in it. These people knew they would die, as we all do, and they reached, with all the wealth and skill they could command, for the one kind of small immortality available to them, a face on a wall, a likeness that might outlast the flesh by centuries. And in a way it worked. Here we are, after all, 2.5 centuries later, still looking at them, still able to meet their pictured eyes. They wanted to be remembered, and they have been. There are far worse things to spend a fortune on than the hope of being looked at kindly by strangers long after you are gone. But we have lingered long enough among the painted faces of the dead. There are living faces here tonight, and 2 of them matter more than all the rest, and it is time at last that we met them. Let us go and find the master and mistress of the place. You will pick them out before anyone points them out to you, not because they stand apart, but because of how they are with each other. In a chamber full of people performing ease, the 2 of them simply have it. His name, as I have said, is John Spencer, an earl of barely a year's standing. Hers is Georgiana, and she was born a points of a good but not enormous family before she became the fine lady moving so lightly through these gilded chambers. And the thing you must understand about the two of them, the thing the whole place has been whispering since we came in, is that theirs was a love match, a real one, a rare one. We have to pause on how rare. A marriage at this height of society, in this century, was almost always a treaty. It joined two fortunes, two bloodlines, two estates. Affection, if it came afterwards, or did not come at all, and a good many men and women of this world lived out their lives beside a husband or a wife, chosen for them by other people for other reasons entirely. John and Georgiana were different, and everyone knew it. They had met when they were very young, he barely 20, she only 17, and they had fallen straightforwardly and headlong in love, in the way that is supposed to belong to people with far less to lose. That the young man in his position should marry for love at all was remarkable. He could have had almost any match he wanted, could have weighed the great families against one another, and chosen the alliance that added most to his already enormous fortune and standing. That was what a man in his place was expected to do, and what most men in his place did, often quite contentedly, because they had been raised to expect nothing else. Instead, he met a girl of charm and warmth and no especial grandeur, and he simply wanted her, and he had the rare good fortune and the rarer courage to be able to follow that wanting where it led. And then they did something that still has the power to startle across all these years. A week before the grand and public wedding that both their families were busily arranging, with all its settlements and its guests and its display, the two of them slipped away and married each other in secret, quietly, with almost no one present. They wed one another first for themselves, but before they wed again in public for the world. I think about that often. The public wedding was the treaty. The secret one, a week before, was the truth. They wanted the truth to come first, before the performance, to belong to each other privately before they belonged to one another publicly, to have one moment that was theirs alone before the great machinery of family and society took the day and made it its own. And they kept the memory of that stolen private wedding close all their lives. And, as we will see before this night is over, they had it written into the very fabric of this place, where no casual visitor would ever read it. So when you watch them now, moving through their own party, greeting their guests, separating to do their duty across them, and drifting back together without seeming to plan it, you are watching something more than a great earl and his countess on display. You are watching two people who chose each other against the grain of their world, and who built this entire shimmering house as a setting for that choice. The building is a love letter. We have been walking through it all evening. And yet, splendid as it is, this mansion is only one of their worlds, and I would not want you to imagine that the Spencers spent their whole lives here in the glitter of the city. For a great family of this age lived two quite different lives, in two quite different places, and moved between them with the turning of the year. And to understand the people in these spaces, you have to know about the other place too, the one that is not here. Far to the north of London, out in the green country of the Midlands, the family had their true seat, a noble house called Althorpe, set in its own broad park, surrounded by the fields and the flocks that were the original source of all this wealth. That was the ancient heart of the family, the seat of their ancestors, the ground their name was truly rooted in. This London palace, for all its magnificence, was the newcomer, the city foothold, barely finished. Althorpe was where they came from. Spencer House was where they had arrived. The year divided the two. There was a season for the city and a season for the country, and the whole of fashionable society moved between them in a slow rhythm, like a tide. When Parliament sat and the court was busy, and the capital filled with the powerful, the great families came up to London, opened their town houses, lit their candles, and through their evenings, exactly the kind of evening we are inside tonight. And when the heat of summer came, and the business of the town wound down, they shut up the townhouses again and went back to the country, to the air and the green and the long light evenings, to manage their estates and ride and shoot and be, for a few months, country gentry rather than city grandees. Each life had its own character. The country life was slower, plainer, more rooted, lived among people who had known the family for generations, in a place full of the accumulated weight of the past. The town life was faster, brighter, more performed, lived among rivals and equals, in a house built to impress. A person could be quite different in the two places, and most of them were, putting on the capital like a fine coat, and shedding it again at the country gate. I find it tells you something gentle about these two people, that they built their city palace so full of private meaning, so threaded with their own love. They could have made it a cold and perfect showpiece, a machine purely for impressing London, and kept their hearts safely back at Althorpe in the country. Instead, they brought their hearts to the capital with them, and built the love letter right here in the heart of the great performing world, where they spent the busiest and most public months of their lives. They refused, in the end, to keep the public self and the private self in separate houses. They folded them together, under one gilded roof, which is a rarer and braver thing than it sounds. There is one room in particular that belongs to her, and we will go to it now, because it tells you as much about Georgiana as the library told you about John. It is called in the plans Lady Spencer's room. It is not large. After the soaring spaces elsewhere, you might almost call it intimate, and that is exactly the point of it. This is the space where Lady Spencer received her own friends, the women of her circle, away from the grand public crush. It was hers in a way little else in a grand house ever truly belonged to a woman. The walls are hung with silk, a deep and glowing crimson, woven specially, the colour of it warming everything in the interior and warming the faces of everyone who sits in it. It is the kind of red that looks almost black in the shadows and then leaps into colour wherever a candle finds it. She hung her own pictures here, the ones she most loved, chosen by her and not for her. Think for a moment about what it meant, in this age, for a woman to have a space that was truly her own. A noble house belonged, in law and in custom, to the man whose name it carried. The stately chambers were built to display his rank, his taste, his fortune. A woman of even the highest station lived for the most part inside a world arranged by men and named for men, expected to grace it rather than to shape it. And so an interior like this one, a room that was hers, decorated to her liking, where she received the people she chose and showed the things she loved, and could simply be herself among her own friends, was a rarer and more precious thing than its modest size suggests. Here she was not on display for society. Here she set the terms. The women who gathered in this crimson room talked of the things women talked of among themselves freely, the children and the marriages and the small griefs and the great gossip, the whole rich underground life of a world that the men in their grander chambers only half glimpsed. A good deal of what truly moved that society, the matches made, the reputations defended or destroyed, the quiet kindnesses and the quiet cruelties, was decided in rooms exactly like this one, by women, over tea, away from the men entirely. The ceiling overhead repeats a pattern copied from an ancient Roman bath, adapted with great cleverness to fit a chamber of this particular shape. Even here, in the most private of the grand spaces, the deep love of antiquity that runs through the whole building is quietly present, drawn down from a vanished world and set over the head of a living woman receiving her friends in London. And the salon plays a clever trick, which is worth knowing as we stand in it. It is positioned so that a guest passing out of this rich, enclosed, crimson space goes directly into the largest and most dazzling room in the mansion. The small chamber is the held breath before the great one. You are kept close and warm and a little hushed, and then the doors open and the whole vast bright space beyond breaks over you all at once. It is the same trick this place has been playing on us all evening, the careful management of contrast, of restraint before release, of the dark hall before the gilded interiors. The Spencers understood something that the truly grand always understand. That splendour felt all at once stops being felt at all. You have to be made to wait for it. You have to be brought to it through smaller chambers, so that when it comes, it lands. It is time to go up. The grand interiors of this building do not all sit on one floor. The lower floor, the one we have been moving through, holds the entrance and the library and the gilded palm room. But the largest and most splendid interiors of all are above us on the first floor, and the way you reach them is itself part of the experience the house wants to give you. So we cross to the main staircase, and we begin to climb, and as we climb something changes around us that is worth understanding, because it is one of the real secrets of this house, hidden in plain sight in the very stones. The house had two architects and they did not agree, and you can feel the seam between them as you go up these stairs. The lower floor, the floor we are leaving, was the work of the first of them, a man named John Vardy. He was a fine architect of the older school, schooled in the grand and weighty manner that had ruled English building for half a century, all noble proportion and Roman gravity. The palm room is his, and you felt his hand in it, rich and a little fantastical, but rooted in the old way of doing things. And then, part way through the building of the place, Vardy was set aside. It must have stung. He had given the front its face and the ground floor its form, and then another man was brought in over him to finish the grand chambers above, a man with newer and more fashionable ideas, fresh from a journey that had changed how Englishmen thought about beauty. His name was James Stewart, and half of London called him Athenian Stewart, because he had done something almost no Englishman had yet done. He had gone to Greece, not to Rome where everyone went, but onward, eastward, to Athens itself, to stand among the actual ruins of the actual Greek world, and measure them and draw them with his own hands. He came home with something nobody else had, real Greek detail, accurately recorded, the true ancient thing rather than the Roman copy of it that Europe had been admiring for centuries. And the rooms we are about to enter, the chambers at the top of this stair, became the first place in all of London where that fresh Greek ornament was put to use in the decoration of a home. It is hard now to feel how daring this was, because the style he brought home went on to conquer everything, and we are so used to it that it looks to us simply like the way grand old rooms are supposed to look. But at the time it was new, genuinely new, a fresh and startling thing. For generations, educated taste had looked to Rome, to the Roman remains, to the Roman way of building, as the highest authority there was. To go behind Rome, to Greece, to the older and purer source that Rome itself had drawn upon, was to reach past the master to the master's master. Stuart was among the very first to do it and to bring the evidence back, and a family that engaged him was buying not just decoration, but the cutting edge of fashion, the newest idea in the whole world of taste, before anyone else had it. So when you stand in these upper chambers, you are standing at a beginning. This is, in a real sense, where a whole age of design started, the clean Greek lines and delicate ornament that would spread from rooms like these out across the country and across the century into countless houses that copied what was first tried here. The Spencers did not follow the fashion. For one brief moment in these interiors, they were the fashion, the place it began. So this staircase is a kind of border crossing. You begin the climb in Vardy's world, the older, heavier Roman world. You arrive at the top in Stuart's, the newer, lighter Greek one. Two visions of the ancient past. Two men who did not love each other, stitched together into one house by the will and the money of the man who owned it. There is a footnote to Stuart that I cannot resist telling you because it makes him human. He was enormously gifted, and he was also, by every account, rather idle. The work crept along. Years passed. This place that should have taken a few seasons to finish took the better part of a decade, in no small part because its second architect would not be hurried and would, by all accounts, far rather have been at his dinner. Genius and laziness in the one man. It is oddly comforting across the centuries that the most beautiful chambers in Georgian London were so hard to get finished. We reach the top of the stairs now, and we pause, because the first of Stuart's rooms is opening in front of us, and it is the largest room in the entire house. This is the room they called, simply and accurately, the Great Room. It is enormous. After the contained and gilded spaces below, the scale of it lands almost like a sound. The ceiling lifts away high overhead. The proportions are vast and calm and confident. This is the chamber built for the true crush of an evening, for receptions, for music on a grand scale, for the moments when the whole of fashionable London seemed to pour through one set of doors at once. And it doubled as the chief gallery of the mansion. The most important pictures hung here, the ones the family was proudest of, looking down over the heads of the company. To stand in this room on a full night was to stand inside the family's wealth and the family's taste at the same time, surrounded on every side by what their money had bought and what their judgment had chosen. Tonight the space is filling. The light in here is extraordinary, because a space this size, lit only by flame, needs a good many flames, and they hang above you in branched fixtures of crystal and gilt, each one carrying its own little constellation of candles, the light multiplied and scattered by the cut glass until the whole ceiling seems to be raining down a soft brightness on the people below. The company moves through it in slow eddies. There is colour everywhere, the deep rich colours of the men's coats, the paler silks of the women, the flash of jewels turning in the light. Voices rise and braid together into that particular sound a large room of people makes, a sound with no words in it, only warmth and motion and the steady undertow of human company. To give a lavish evening in an interior like this was, for the family, a serious undertaking and a serious statement. The invitations had gone out weeks before, carried round the city by footmen. The right guests had to be asked, and the right ones had to come, and the number who came and who they were would be noted and discussed across London for days afterward. A thin evening was a quiet humiliation. A crush, a room so full that one could barely move through it, was the highest success, and a hostess might boast, without quite boasting, of how impossibly crowded her rooms had been. The crowd itself was the achievement. To fill this enormous room with the cream of society was to prove, in the most public way the age allowed, exactly how much the family mattered. And there is a real art to managing it, which the mistress of the house performs all evening without ever seeming to work at all. She must greet and circulate and make each guest feel singled out and welcome, and keep the whole machine of the night turning smoothly, and never once appear to be doing anything but enjoying herself among friends. It is exhausting, and it is a skill, and the women who were great at it were powers in the land in their own right, their houses the places where reputations were made and alliances formed, their good opinion worth pursuing. Georgiana, the mistress of this house, has it in full, and her daughter, asleep upstairs, will one day have it more brilliantly than almost anyone of her age. I want you to do something here before we move on. Stand for a moment at the edge of this grand bright saloon, the way you might at a real party where you know almost no one, and simply let it wash over you. The light, the colour, the warmth, the wordless surf of talk. You are not required to join it. You are only required to be carried by it. That is what a night like this offers even now, even to us, looking in from so far away. The relief of being inside warmth and light and company, and not having to do a single thing about it. And now, threading up through all that talk, getting clearer as the company instinctively softens its voices to let it through, comes the music. There are musicians at one end of the interior, real ones, hired for the gathering, and they have been playing quietly all this while, almost unnoticed, the way music at a party is meant to live underneath the talk rather than over it. But every so often, by some unspoken agreement, the salon settles, and the music comes forward and is heard. You must set aside, completely, the way music reaches you now. We carry songs in our pockets and pour them into our ears at any hour, endless, on demand. For these people, music was rare and it was alive. It happened in a chamber, made by human hands on strings and keys, in the same air you were breathing, and when it stopped, it was simply gone. There was no way to keep it. You heard it once, and then it lived only in memory. That made listening a different and more attentive thing than it is for us. When the harpsichord began, or the strings drew their first long note, people genuinely listened, because there would be no second chance at this particular performance of this particular piece, in this chamber, on this night, with these candles burning down. The pieces would be the polite, elegant music of the age, ordered and graceful, built on clear lines and gentle resolutions, music that soothed rather than stormed. It suited the room. It suited the hour. It moved through the great bright space like something poured, filling the corners, settling on the company, and the talk lowered itself beneath it out of respect and out of pleasure. The instruments themselves are worth picturing, because they are not quite the instruments we know. There would be a harpsichord, very likely, its strings plucked rather than struck, giving a bright, silvery, slightly brittle sound, quite different from the deep singing tone of the pianoforte that was only then beginning to come into fashion and would soon sweep the older instrument away. That there would be strings, violins and a cello, their warm voices winding around the harpsichord's bright one. Perhaps a flute. A small company of players making between them a sound that filled this great room without ever overpowering it. And in a family like this, the music would not all be hired. The accomplishments of the daughters of such a grand house always included music, and a young woman would be taught to play and sometimes to sing, and would be expected, on an evening among friends, to perform. It was part of her education and part of her display, one more of the graces by which she would one day be judged. A girl might practice a single piece for weeks, knowing she would play it before the people whose opinion most shaped her future, and the small ordeal of that performance, the nerves, the hope, the relief when it was done, was a rite of passage that almost every young woman of this world passed through. So music here was not a thing bought and consumed. It was woven into the very fabric of how these people lived and learned and presented themselves to one another. To make music was an accomplishment. To listen well was a courtesy, and to sit in a great lit chamber while living hands made a living sound that would exist only once and then be gone forever was an ordinary evening's pleasure that we, with all our endless recorded music, can scarcely imagine the rarity and the preciousness of. Close your eyes for a moment, if they are not closed already, and let the music be the thing you hold on to. The talk and the light and the colour are all still there, but underneath them now there is this ordered, living, graceful sound made by people long dead, in a space that no longer exists in the form we are imagining on a winter night, 2.5 centuries gone. And yet here it is somehow, playing softly at the edge of your mind. That is the strange gift of all of this. The evening is over, and the evening is also, just now, going on. And where there is music in a great room like this, there is very often dancing, and on a fuller night this vast space would clear its centre and become a floor, and the whole character of the party would shift again. So let us imagine it, the dancing, because it was one of the chief pleasures and one of the chief businesses of an evening like this, and the two things at once. You must put aside entirely the way we dance now. There was nothing loose or free about it. The dances of this age were formal, patterned, learned, a kind of moving geometry performed by couples who knew the steps as well as they knew their own names, because they had been taught them painstakingly from childhood by dancing masters hired for the purpose. To dance well was a mark of breeding. To dance badly, or not to know the steps at all, was a small public humiliation, and so everyone of this world could dance, and dance correctly, whether they enjoyed it or not. There were the stately dances, slow and ceremonious, where a single couple might move down the chamber alone, watched by everyone. Every step a small performance of grace and control, the whole company judging, silently, how well it was done. And there were the longer country dances, where many couples formed up in long lines facing each other, and moved through their figures together, advancing and retiring, turning and crossing and weaving down the set, so that the whole chamber became one slow interlocking pattern of bodies moving in time. What I want you to feel about it is how much it carried underneath the steps. For a young woman of this world, the dance was one of the very few occasions on which she might speak with a young man at length, more or less privately, in full view of everyone, and yet within a little bubble of her own. A hand was taken and released and taken again. Words were exchanged in the brief moments the figures allowed. A good deal could be said, and a good deal more left unsaid, in the course of a single dance, and the mothers and chaperones ranged around the walls watched every turn of it with the keenest attention, reading the space like a book. So the dancing was never only dancing. It was courtship conducted in code. It was the marriage market in motion. It was reputation and hope and strategy, all performed to elegant music in the middle of a brilliant room, by people smiling and breathing a little hard and giving away, in the warmth of a hand or the angle of a glance, far more than the formal steps were supposed to allow. The pattern on the floor was geometry. The pattern underneath it was the oldest human story there is. And for those who did not dance, the older guests, the married, the tired, the simply unwilling, there was the great pleasure of watching, which is its own kind of evening. To sit at the edge of a lit interior and watch younger people dance, the colour and the motion, the silk turning under the candlelight, the small dramas playing out across the floor, is a gentle and slightly wistful pleasure that has not changed in 2.5 centuries, and you may take it now, from your seat at the edge of the interior, as fully as anyone there. Now that we are standing in the brightest room in the house, with the candlelight pouring down and the company turning slowly through it, let us look properly at the people themselves, because the way they are dressed tonight is its own small marvel and its own small ordeal. Begin with the women, because the women carry the greater weight of it in every sense. A lady of this world does not simply put on a gown, she is built into one over the course of an afternoon by other hands than her own. There are layers beneath layers, the shift against the skin, the stays laced firm to give the body its fashionable line, the hoops or padding that hold the skirts out wide, and over all of it the gown itself, in silk that cost more by the yard than most of the people downstairs earn in a month. The silk is the glory of it. It catches the candlelight and holds it, so that as a woman crosses the salon, her gown seems to pour light from fold to fold, shifting colour as she turns, sea green to silver, rose to deep wine. These are not flat fabrics. They are woven to be seen by flame, shot through with threads that wake up only in moving light, and in an interior like this one they do exactly what they were made to do. Then there is the hair, and the hair is a project in itself. It is dressed high and elaborate, and held in place with pins and pomade, and over it goes the powder, fine white powder, sometimes scented, puffed on in a small closet set aside for the purpose, so that the rest of the spaces are not dusted with it. A lady would hold a cone of paper or a cloth over her face while it was applied, to keep it from her eyes, and emerge with her hair turned the soft pale grey that the age found so elegant. The men are scarcely less constructed. The coat is heavy and richly cut, often embroidered, the waistcoat beneath it a panel of fine work all its own. Many of the gentlemen wear wigs, also powdered, also white, and those who wear their own hair have dressed and powdered it to match. A well-dressed man of this evening is a considerable piece of engineering, and he has had help getting into it too. And the men of this age are not the sober creatures we became later. A gentleman of this date dresses in colour, in deep rich silks and velvets, plum and bottle green and dove grey and pale gold, his coat and waistcoat as fine and as carefully chosen as anything a woman wears. The waistcoat in particular is a field for display, embroidered with flowers or scrolling patterns in coloured silks and even silver and gold thread, a small work of art worn across the chest. There is nothing in it that the age thought unmanly. To dress richly and beautifully was simply what a man of rank did, as much as a woman, and the room tonight is as full of colour on its men as on its women, the whole company a moving garden of silk under the candlelight. Here is the part we forget when we look at the lovely portraits. All of this was hot, and much of it was uncomfortable, and the discomfort was the price of belonging. Imagine the heat now, in this packed room, with hundreds of candles burning and a roaring fire at either end, and a crush of bodies in heavy silk and wool, and the windows shut tight against the winter. It would be sweltering. The powder would grow heavy. The stays would not loosen. And not one person of fashion would dream of showing the slightest sign of strain. That, in the end, is what the dress is. It is a language, and it is a discipline. It says, without a word, exactly who you are and what you may afford, and how well you understand the rules. And it asks, in return, that you bear a good deal of quiet bodily suffering with a serene face, hour after hour, and call it pleasure. There is something almost heroic in it, and something a little sad, and the two feelings sit together comfortably enough once you have watched the company for a while. And it is not only the great garments that carry meaning. Look closer at the small things in people's hands, because this is an age that loaded enormous significance into tiny portable objects, and a guest who knew how to read them could learn a good deal across a crowded salon. Begin with the fans the women carry. A fan is a practical thing, in a hot, crowded interior, a way to move a little air across a flushed face. But it had become, by this date, far more than that. A fan was a tool of conversation, almost a second language. The way a woman opened it, closed it, held it, fluttered it, hid the lower half of her face behind it, or let it rest in her lap, all of this could be made to say things that could not be said aloud, to signal interest or coolness, invitation or refusal, to a person across the chamber who knew how to look. A skilled woman could conduct a whole silent exchange with nothing but a painted fan and her eyes in full view of a chaperone who saw only a lady keeping cool. Then there are the jewels, catching the candlelight at throat and wrist and in the powdered hair. Some of them are the real and ancient treasures of great families, diamonds and pearls passed down for generations, brought out of locked boxes for a night like this, and worn as a kind of portable history. Some are newer, and some, it must be said, are clever imitations, paste stones cut and set to flash like the real thing in candlelight, where few eyes could tell the difference. The line between the true jewel and the false one was one more of the evening's quiet games, and not everyone playing it was as rich as the stones at their throats suggested. The men have their small objects too, and chief among them is the snuff box. Taking snuff, a pinch of fine-scented tobacco lifted to the nose, was the universal habit of fashionable men, and the box it came in had become a thing of real art and high status. A gentleman might own many, in gold and enamel, and set with miniatures, and the taking of snuff was a whole small performance. The box produced, opened with a practised flick, the pinch offered to a friend, taken, the box closed and returned to the pocket. The whole ritual a way of pausing a conversation, of buying a moment to think, of showing, with one beautiful object, exactly who you were. And there were the watches, worn on a chain or a riband, themselves jewels as much as instruments. There were the little cases that held a lady's needle and scissors, the boxes that held the small black patches some still wore on the face, the gloves carried rather than worn, the canes the men leaned on. A person of fashion moved through the night surrounded by a little constellation of beautiful, useful objects, each one chosen, each one saying something, each one a tiny declaration of taste and means. I find it rather wonderful, this freight of meaning loaded onto little objects, because we have so largely lost it. We carry far more in our pockets than they did, and almost none of it speaks of us in this way, or asks to be admired, or becomes a thing of beauty in its own right. That they had fewer things, and they made each one matter, and a fan or a snuff box could be a small work of art that a person treasured for a lifetime and handed on. There is a lesson in that too, perhaps, about the difference between having much and loving what you have. But the bell has sounded, somewhere beneath the music, and the doors to the dining room are opening, and the whole bright machinery of the gathering now turns toward its centre. It is time to go in to supper, and even this, the simple act of walking from one room to another, is governed by rules as fine as everything else tonight. The company does not simply drift in, they go in by precedence, in order of rank, the highest in the space leading, and the rest following in their proper places. Each gentleman offering his arm to a particular lady, the pairings and the order worked out by an etiquette that everyone present has absorbed so deeply they scarcely have to think about it. Who goes in first? Who walks with whom? Where each person sits when they arrive? All of it is settled by an invisible map of status that the whole space carries in its head. To get it wrong, to take a place above your station, or to slight someone by ranking them too low, was a real error, noticed and remembered. So the procession into supper is a kind of living diagram of the whole society, its hierarchy made visible for a moment in the order of a walk through a doorway, and then everyone is seated, and the diagram dissolves back into the warmth of the table. The dining room is a noble, columned space, framed at one end by tall pillars that look to the eye like the rarest coloured marble, veined and polished and cool. They are not marble. They are a clever imitation of it, a worked plaster polished to a glassy shine, indistinguishable from the real thing in candlelight and a fraction of the cost. Even here the place plays its quiet game of seeming and being, and does it so well that you would never know unless you were told. I find that small deception rather charming and very revealing of the age. We might expect a family this rich to use only the genuine article, real marble at any cost, and to scorn an imitation as beneath them. But the 18th century did not think that way. It delighted in skill, in the cleverness of the thing, in the craftsman's ability to make humble plaster pass for precious stone so perfectly that the eye could not catch the trick. The imitation was not a cheat to be hidden, but an accomplishment to be admired, the work of a master who had spent years learning to grind and tint and polish his plaster until it sang. There is a whole philosophy folded into those false marble columns, a love of artifice openly enjoyed, a pleasure in the made thing that does not pretend the world is other than it is. The columns are not marble, and everyone knew it, and that was part of the pleasure of them. The table is the heart of it, and the table, when you first see it laid, takes the breath. This is not how we serve a meal now. The dishes do not arrive one after another in a procession. They come all at once. The whole table is covered, edge to edge, in a great symmetrical arrangement of dishes set down together, so that the diners look out over a landscape of food, gleaming under the candles. Roasted meats and boiled fowl, pies raised tall and glazed, fish in rich sauces, dishes of vegetables dressed and buttered, all arranged around the table in a pattern as careful as the plasterwork on the ceiling. You did not ask for a dish to be passed the length of the table. You ate, for the most part, from what stood near you, and a well-planned table made sure that something good stood near everyone. The food itself would surprise us in its richness and its strangeness both. The sauces are deep and complex, built on long-simmered stocks and wine and spices, for spice was still a mark of wealth, and used with a free hand. There are dishes we would recognize and dishes we would not. Savoury things made sweet, and sweet things made savoury, whole birds dressed and refeathered to look alive, meats glazed and gilded, the cook showing her art in elaboration rather than restraint. This is not the clean simplicity we prize now. This is abundance as a virtue, richness as a courtesy, a table that means to overwhelm, and there is a quiet choreography to the eating that everyone present has known since childhood. Which dish to take from, how much, how to serve a neighbour graciously, how to manage the implements, what to praise and how warmly, when to speak and when to listen. A formal dinner was a performance with 100 small rules, and to break one was to mark yourself gently but unmistakably as not quite of this world. The people at this table move through all of it without a thought, the way you move through the customs of your own table, and the ease is the whole point. The silver alone is a fortune laid out in the open. Branched candlesticks march down the centre of the cloth, doubling the light. There are tureens and salvers and casters, all of it polished until it burns with reflected flame, all of it engraved very often with the family's own crest, so that even the spoon in your hand reminds you gently whose hospitality you are enjoying. And there is the wine, brought up by the steward's careful reckoning from the cellars below, poured into glasses so thin they ring at a touch. The cellars of a place like this are a treasury in their own right, laid down with care over years. The wines of France and Portugal, and the Rhine resting in the cool dark beneath the building, waiting for nights exactly like this one. The light comes through the wine, and lays small trembling pools of red on the white cloth. Glasses are raised, healths are drunk, the talk grows warmer and easier, as the evening's earlier formality loosens by a degree or two. What I want you to feel, sitting at this table in your mind, is the abundance of it set against the season outside. It is the dead of winter. The park beyond the shuttered windows is frozen and black. And yet here are fruits and delicate sweet things and fresh green dishes that have no business existing in a London January, forced into early life in heated glasshouses on the family's estates, or kept or candied or brought from far away at ruinous cost, all so that this table on this night could deny the winter entirely. That denial is the deepest luxury in the whole building. Not the gold, not the silk, not the pictures, the simple, staggering ability to sit in the middle of a hard winter and eat as though it were high summer, to make the season itself disappear at the edge of the table. To these guests it was the natural order of things. To the people downstairs who grew and carried and cooked it, and to almost everyone else alive in that cold city, it was a small daily miracle they would never taste. But the supper is not quite done, because the most theatrical part of it is still to come, and it is the part the kitchens have laboured over most lovingly of all. The savoury dishes are cleared, and in their place comes the sweet course. And the sweet course in a noble house of this age was less a dish to eat than a thing to marvel at. Sugar was the heart of it, and sugar, in this century, was wealth made edible. It came from far across the sea, carried in ships over long months at a cost, in money and in human labour, that the people eating it rarely paused to reckon. By the time it reached a table like this one, it had been refined and whitened and worked into a substance precious enough to display, and display it they did. For the grand houses employed confectioners who were in truth sculptors, and sugar was their marble. They built with it. Whole centrepieces rose from the table, made of spun and moulded sugar, temples and gardens and arches and baskets of sugar flowers, glittering constructions that could take days to make, and that existed only to be admired by candlelight for a single evening before they were broken up. There might be a whole landscape in sugar running down the centre of the table, a little frozen world made entirely to be looked at, and then destroyed. And around these confections came the things that defied the season even more boldly than the supper had: candied fruits, preserved against the winter in sugar, creams and jellies set in moulds into elegant shapes, trembling and translucent, ices, even, in the dead of winter, made with ice cut from frozen ponds in the cold months, and buried deep in straw-filled ice houses on the country estates, kept frozen underground through the year so that, on a cold midwinter night like this, the family could serve something cold and sweet as a quiet act of wizardry. And then, if the family wished to make the very loftiest statement that hospitality could make, there would be a pineapple. You must understand what a pineapple meant in this world. It was the king of fruits, the supreme symbol of wealth and welcome, grown in England only with monstrous difficulty, in specially heated glass houses tended for years by skilled gardeners, at a cost so staggering that a single fruit could be worth more than a labourer earned in many months. They were so precious that they were sometimes not eaten at all, only displayed. The same prized fruit carried from house to house as a centrepiece until it finally began to rot. To set a real pineapple before your guests was to say, without a single word, that there was no expense in the world you could not command. It crowned the table like a small spiked crown, and everyone at the table understood exactly what it meant. There is a kind of beautiful madness in all of it, when you stand back and look. The sculpting of sugar that would be smashed by midnight, the burying of winter ice to serve in winter, the years of a gardener's patient skill spent on a single fruit that might only be looked at. It is worth at play, money amusing itself, wealth turning the ordinary laws of nature and season into toys. And it is in its strange way rather wonderful, this human refusal to simply accept that it is winter and that the season is plain. They made it summer on the table by sheer force of money and ingenuity, and for the length of one evening, in one warm room, they won. And when the last of the sweet things has been admired and tasted, the supper comes to its end in a way that will seem strange to us, but that everyone at the table understands perfectly, because it happened at the close of every formal dinner of the age. The ladies rise. At a quiet signal from the mistress of this place, the women of the company get to their feet together and withdraw, leaving the men alone at the table. This is the famous ritual that gave us the very word, the drawing-room being. At its root, the withdrawing-room, the interior the ladies withdrew to. The women go through together, in a soft rustle of silk, to a room of their own, where the fire is bright and the tea things are waiting. And there, among themselves, the talk turns easier and more private than it could ever be with the men present. The real confidences of the evening exchanged now, woman to woman, in the warmth. And the men remain, and the cloth is drawn, and the wine comes round in earnest. This is the hour for the deeper drinking and the franker talk, for politics and business and the kind of robust humour that the presence of the ladies had kept in check. The bottle passes from hand to hand around the table. Healths are drunk, voices rise, and the company of men settles into an hour that is older than any of the refinements around it. Men at a table with wine and one another, as they have sat since the beginning of feasting. I find the separation rather poignant looking back. For an hour or so, the party splits cleanly in two. The women in their warm, bright chamber, the men over their wine, two separate worlds under one roof, each doing the thing it could only do apart from the other. There was loss in it, surely, and a kind of strangeness to our eyes. But there was also something each side valued, the chance, in a life lived so much on display and so much in company, to be for a while among one's own, unwatched by the other half of the world. And then, after a decent interval, the men rise too and go through to join the ladies, and the evening knits itself back together. The doors open, the company is whole again, and now comes the gentler part of the night, the tea and the cards and the music, the part of the night when the formal business of dining is done, and the night can soften into mere pleasure. It is to those hours that we turn now. When the eating slows and the long supper begins to settle, the company drifts again, and in a quieter salon off the main chambers the card tables have been set out, and the candles trimmed, and a good part of the gathering's real intensity is about to gather there. Cards were not a trifle in this world. They were close to a passion, and for some, closer to a sickness. The age gambled with an abandon that can be hard to credit now. Fortunes that had taken generations to build could change hands across a card table in a single night, and great families were quietly ruined at play more often than anyone liked to say aloud. But tonight, in this place, the play is genteel, the tables are small, the company seated four to a table, the cards dealt and gathered with the soft riffle and snap that is the only sound, for a while, in this calmer room. The games are the games of the age, games of memory and partnership and nerve, and the people bent over the tables are concentrating now in a way they have not concentrated all evening. The chief of these games asked 4 players to sit as 2 partners against 2, and to win their tricks by memory and judgment and the silent reading of a partner's play across the table, with not a word permitted between allies. It is a game of attention, of holding in your head everything that has been laid down, of guessing from the smallest sign what your partner holds and what your opponents are hiding. Played well, it is less a pastime than a quiet duel of minds, and the people of this age played it for hours, by the same candlelight, with the same fierce pleasure that we might give to anything we love. There were lighter games too, faster and more dependent on luck, where the money came and went quickly and the table grew loud, and there were the slow and stately games for those who wished only to pass a gentle hour. A grand evening offered them all, and a guest could find the table that suited their mood, the sharp contest or the easy chatter, and settle there for as long as they liked. The money matters, even here, even gently. Stakes are part of the play, always, and even among friends a little is won and lost, enough to sharpen the attention without breaking any hearts. The coins sit at each player's elbow, catching the candlelight, moving slowly round the table through the evening as the hands are won and lost. It is play, and it is also, faintly, a contest of fortune, and that little edge of real consequence is exactly what makes a game absorbing rather than merely something to do with the hands. It is a curious thing to watch from the doorway. In the noble chambers beyond, all is light and motion and talk. Here at the card tables there is a pocket of stillness and silence and fixed attention. 4 faces lit from below by the candle at the centre of the table, each one giving away as little as the silk gowns gave away the heat. To play well was to feel much and show nothing, which was, when you think of it, the whole art of this society in miniature. I find the card room the most human part of the evening, in a way. The stately chambers are a performance of ease. The card table is where the mask slips just slightly, where you can read in the set of a mouth or the stillness of a hand that something real is at stake, that this person wants to win, or is afraid to lose, or is happy simply to sit in the warmth and the lamplight and let the world narrow to a handful of cards and the faces of 3 friends. There is a particular contentment in a game among people you trust, the talk wandering between the hands, the candle burning down, nowhere else to be, and nothing else to do, and the people at these tables have it tonight, as fully as anyone ever has. We will leave them to their hands. The night is deepening, and there is a part of the mansion we have not yet been, far above all this, where the smallest members of the family are already asleep. For this is not only a grand house, it is a home, and somewhere up under the roof, away from the music and the light, there are children in their beds. There are 3 of them at this date who lived past the dangerous early years. The eldest is a girl of about 9, named Georgiana for her mother, a bright and charming child who has no idea, asleep up there in the winter dark, that she will grow into one of the most famous women in all of England, a great beauty and a power in the land, talked of and painted and gossiped about for the rest of her life. Tonight she is just a sleeping child in a noble house, and the most remarkable thing about her is still ahead of her. There is her younger brother, a boy of about 8, who will one day inherit all of this, the house and the title and the weight of the name, and who is for now mercifully free of all of it, asleep with a child's whole heart. And there is a smaller girl still, only about 5, the baby of the 3. Up in the nursery the world of the party reaches them only faintly. The music is a thread of sound coming up through the floors, felt almost more than heard, the way music in another part of a house comes to a child half asleep, not as melody, but as a warm signal that the grown world is awake and busy, and that all is well below. The nurse sits up with them, or dozes near them, while 2 floors down their parents move through the most glittering rooms in London. The childhood of a grand house was its own particular world, lived mostly apart from the grand chambers and the grandparents. These children spent their days up here, in the nursery and the rooms around it, in the care of a nurse, and before long, a governess or a tutor, seeing their mother and father at appointed times rather than freely, brought down to be admired by guests, and then carried back up to their own quieter kingdom. It sounds cool to us, this distance, and in some houses it was. But there was great affection in it too, and in this mansion, built on love as it was, the children were cherished, and their mother in particular was warmer with them than the custom of her class required. They are learning already the things their station will ask of them. The girl is learning to read, and to write a fair hand, to dance, to sit a horse, to play a little music, to move and speak as a lady must, the long apprenticeship in grace that began almost in the cradle for a child of her rank. The boy is being shaped toward the weight he will one day carry, the title and the lands and the name. None of it presses on them tonight. Tonight they are simply asleep. I told you the eldest girl would become famous, and she will, more famous than anyone now sleeping in this building, more famous in her day than her parents, talked of across the whole kingdom for her beauty, and her warmth, and her wit, and the brilliant, complicated life ahead of her. But all of that is years away and unguessable, and I will not crowd her sleep with it. Let her be 9 years old tonight, and dreaming, and entirely her parents' child, but before the world ever learns her name. I am always moved by the children in a fine mansion like this. They make the whole vast pile of stone and gold mean something simpler than it means to anyone else. To the guests, it is a marvel. To society, it is a statement. To these 3 small sleepers, it is only home. The only home they know, the ordinary place where they live, where the strange, beautiful interiors downstairs are just them downstairs, and the famous parents are just mother and father. And the gold palm trees are something you grew up walking past on your way to somewhere more interesting. We will not wake them. Let them sleep through their own lavish evening, the way children always do. While the music plays on below and the children sleep above, let me draw you aside for a little while, the way a guest at a long evening sometimes finds a quieter corner and a knowledgeable friend, and let me tell you how this family came to be, standing in these astonishing rooms at all, because the Spencers were not always so high, and the story of how they rose is folded into the very confidence of the house around you. Go back far enough, 2.5 centuries before this night, and you find no earls at all. You find sheep. The Spencers made their first money, the foundation of everything you see, in wool, in the patient and unglamorous business of grazing great flocks on the green Midland pastures and selling their fleeces in the days when English wool was among the most valuable commodities in Europe. There is no shame in it, and there was no shame felt. A good many of the proudest families in England, if you trace them back, you reach a shrewd merchant or a careful farmer at the root of the tree, a man who understood money and land and the slow art of turning one into the other. The Spencers understood it better than most. Generation upon generation they bought land, married well, sat in Parliament, and climbed. By the time we reach the grandmother who matters most to this story, the family had arrived very near the summit. John Spencer was the great-grandson of one of the most formidable women of the previous age, Sarah, the old Duchess of Marlborough, the famous, fierce, fabulously wealthy companion of a queen, a woman who had quarrelled with monarchs and amassed a fortune that made even the great families blink. It was old Sarah, near the end of her long and combative life, who singled out this particular boy among all her descendants, and left him an enormous share of her wealth. She had her reasons and her conditions and her grudges, as she always did. But the upshot for our purposes is plain. The money that built this house came down, in good part, from that ferocious old Duchess, passed to a boy of 12, and turned by him, in time, into gold palm trees and painted ceilings, and a temple of stone at the edge of Green Park. She is worth pausing on, that old woman, because she is so unlike the gentle love story at the heart of this house, and yet the place could not exist without her. She had been the closest companion of a queen, and had risen with her, and quarrelled with her, and fallen from her favour in a storm of temper that became legendary. She had amassed, by shrewdness and force of will, one of the great fortunes of the age, and she had outlived almost everyone, growing only fiercer and more formidable with the years, dispensing her money to her heirs with all the calculation of a general deploying troops. The boy who became this earl was her chosen instrument, the vessel into which a great part of that hard-won fortune was poured. There is a strange and pleasing symmetry in it. The ruthless old Duchess's money, gathered in the bare-knuckled world of court politics, came at last to rest, as the setting for one of the tenderest marriages of the age. The iron made the gold possible. I find it worth holding in mind as you stand in these rooms. Every column, every yard of silk, every flake of gold leaf trembling in the candlelight rests at the very bottom on centuries of wool and on the iron will of a duchess who has been dead for 20 years and more on the night we are visiting. The grandest beauty almost always has something hard and practical, and a little ruthless at its foundation. The building floats above all that now, serene and lovely, but it floats on a long history of getting and keeping that it would never dream of mentioning to its guests. And the marriage that we keep returning to belongs to this same story, because it was the moment the family's hard practicality and its private heart pulled, for once, in different directions, and the heart won. A young man with that fortune behind him could have married almost anyone, could have joined his wealth to a dukedom, and made the family higher still. Instead, he married for love, and married in secret first, as we have seen, and built this whole house as a monument to having done so. The wool money paid for it, but it was love that decided what shape it took. That is the real secret of Spencer House, hidden under all the others. It is a fortune that chose, just once, to spend itself on tenderness. Now let me turn your attention from the family to this place itself once more, because there is a question I think worth asking as we stand here, surrounded by all this perfection, and it is a question the guests of this evening would mostly never think to ask. Who made it? Not who paid for it, and not who designed it, for those names are known, but whose actual hands brought it into being, inch by inch over the long years of its building. For a place like this is not raised by its earl, and it is not raised by its architects. It is raised by an army, and that army is almost entirely nameless to us now. Think only of the ceilings overhead, those expanses of crisp white plasterwork, every leaf and ribbon and rosette of it modelled by hand. Somewhere there were plasterers on high scaffolds, working with wet plaster against the clock before it set, shaping the ornament that you now admire from far below, craning their necks for months on end, until the work was done. Picture the gilders in the palm room, laying that gold leaf one impossibly thin sheet at a time, breathing carefully so as not to send the leaf flying, pressing it down with a soft brush, working over every carved frond until a whole grove of gold stood finished. It is patient, exacting, anonymous labour, the kind that leaves no signature, and the salon we gasped at earlier is the sum of thousands of hours of it. Think of the carvers who cut those palm trunks and griffins from wood, the masons who dressed every block of Dorset stone on the front, the joiners, the painters, the men who hauled and hoisted and mixed, and the boys who fetched and carried for them. A noble house is a kind of frozen labour, beauty made out of an ocean of work, and almost none of the workers are remembered. And these were not unskilled hands. The plasterer who could model a wreath of leaves so crisp and lifelike that it seems to have grown on the ceiling had served a long apprenticeship and spent a lifetime, perfecting his eye and his touch. The gilder, the carver, the man who mixed and laid the coloured plasters that imitate marble so perfectly you cannot tell the difference, each of these was a master of a difficult craft, as much an artist in his way as the architect whose name the mansion remembers. They simply belonged to a class whose names were not written down, who signed nothing, who were paid and dismissed and forgotten, their genius absorbed entirely into the work, and the work credited to other men. There is a whole vanished world of such people behind every old and beautiful thing. The makers of cathedrals and the makers of furniture, the weavers of the silks on the walls and the blowers of the glass in the mirrors, the potters and the founders and the smiths. We have the houses they built and the things they made, and we have, for the most part, lost the people entirely. Their names, their faces, their lives, all gone, leaving only the beauty their hands left behind. To walk through a house like this with that in mind is to feel oneself surrounded by a whole company of the forgotten, present everywhere in their work and nowhere in the record. I mentioned earlier that the second architect, the gifted and idle Stuart, let the building drag on for years, spare a thought for what those years meant for the men under him, while the fashionable world waited, mildly impatient, for the noble chambers to be finished. It was the craftsmen who actually waited out the seasons on the scaffolds, who came back morning after morning to the half-made rooms, who lived their own ordinary lives in the long shadow of someone else's masterpiece. There is a particular feeling I get in old houses, and perhaps you know it too. It is the sense of all those vanished hands. You run a finger along a carved edge and you are touching, across all the years, the exact place where some long-dead craftsman set down his tool and judged the work finished. The Earl and his Countess gave this place its meaning and its money, but it was a whole crowd of forgotten people who gave it its actual existence, and on a quiet evening, in a corner of a lavish party, I think it is worth lifting a glass to them silently before we move on. The house would not thank you for it, but they might have. And since we have let our minds wander out beyond these walls, to the people who made the house and the country the family came from, let me hold us out there just a moment longer and tell you a little about the city itself, the great dark sea of London that laps right up to the door of this bright house, because the contrast between the two is the whole emotional truth of the evening. The London of this winter is the largest city in Europe and one of the largest in the world. Something like 750,000 people are crowded into it, more than in any other city on the continent, and it is growing all the time, spreading outward year by year into the fields, swallowing villages, throwing up new streets and squares. It is the beating heart of a trading empire that reaches halfway round the globe, and the wealth of that whole vast enterprise flows through it, which is part of why a noble house like this one can exist at all. But it is not, for most of those who live in it, a gentle place. Beyond the charmed few streets around the palace and the park, London is loud and dirty and dangerous and desperately poor in great stretches. The River Thames is its true high road, crowded with ships and barges and wherries, carrying in the coal and the food and the goods of the world, and carrying out the trade that pays for everything. The streets are choked with carts and carriages and animals and people, the noise of it astonishing, the smell of it, in the warmer months, scarcely to be borne. And at night, the London we are visiting becomes something else again. There is no proper street lighting to speak of, only the scattered oil lamps and the linkboys' torches we saw at the start of the night. Once the sun is down, most of London is given over to the dark, and the dark is not safe. Respectable people are home behind locked doors. The streets belong to the watchmen, and to those with reasons to be abroad in the night that will not bear daylight. To move through the city after dark is to carry your own light and keep your wits about you and hurry. Hold that picture in your mind and then come back with me to where we are standing. Out there, all around this mansion, lies that enormous, roaring, half-lit, hard-living city where most are cold tonight and many are hungry, and the night is genuinely something to fear. And in here, in these few warm interiors, the candles burn by the hundred, the fires never die, the table groans with summer fruit in the depth of winter, and the worst danger anyone faces is a clumsy remark or a losing hand of cards. That is the truth of every great lit house on every black winter night, in that age, and in this one. It is an island. It is a small, warm refuge of light and plenty, held against an enormous surrounding world of cold and night and want. The people inside did not, mostly, dwell on this. Why would they? But it is worth our dwelling on it, just for a moment, because it is exactly why the warmth and the light feel so good to them and to us. Comfort is only truly felt against the memory of its absence. The place is beautiful in itself, but it is beautiful most of all because of the great dark city pressing in all around it, against which it shines. Come back with me now into the principal spaces where the gathering has eased into its gentler middle hours. The supper is done, The most formal part of the night is behind everyone, and a softer kind of sociability has settled over the company, the way a chamber of people loosens once they have eaten well together and no longer have anything to prove for an hour or two. Onte. This is the hour of tea and small refreshments, and tea, in this building and this century, is not the casual thing it has become for us. It is a small ceremony, presided over by the lady of the building, or by a daughter old enough to be trusted with it, and it carries a quiet weight of meaning that is easy to miss now. The leaf itself is costly, brought half across the world in the holds of ships, and in many houses it is kept under lock and key by the mistress herself, doled out spoonful by careful spoonful, too precious to leave to the servants. To be offered tea is to be honoured. To be allowed to linger over it is to be counted a friend. So watch how it is done. The equipage is brought out, the pot and the cups of fine thin porcelain, the little dishes, the sugar in its broken lumps to be lifted with tongs. Hot water is carried up from far below by a servant who has climbed a good many stairs to deliver it still steaming, and then the lady of this place pours with a grace that has been practised since girlhood, and the cups go round, and the company gathers in smaller, warmer knots than the grand spaces encouraged earlier, heads bent together, voices lowered, the talk turning more personal and more real. The porcelain itself is worth a glance, because it too tells a story of how wide this small ceremony's roots run. The finest cups are thin as eggshell and almost translucent when a candle is behind them, and the secret of making such ware had come, like the tea itself, from far away to the east, from China, carried across the world in the same ships, so prized in Europe that men had spent lifetimes trying to discover how it was made. To drink tea from such a cup was to hold in your two hands the produce of half the globe, the leaf from one distant land and the cup from another, brought together at ruinous cost on a table in London, and to think nothing of it at all. And notice that the cups, at this date, have no handles. They are little bowls, really, and you hold them by the rim and the foot, and you learn to judge the heat, and there is a whole quiet etiquette to it, how the cup is held, how it is set down when it is refilled, when a guest signals, with some small accepted gesture, that they have had enough. A newcomer to this world could betray themselves a dozen ways over a single cup of tea, and the people who belonged knew it, and watched, kindly or otherwise. There is something I love about this hour of an old evening, and it is the same thing I love about the same hour of a good evening now, across all the distance of years. It is the hour when the performance relaxes. Earlier in the night everyone was a little on display, arriving, being seen, taking the measure of the room. Now, warmed by food and wine and the steady fires, with the tea going round and the music gentler, people simply talk, and in the talking they become, for a while, themselves. And what did they talk about, these people, in their silk and their powder, with the candles burning down around them? It is a fair thing to wonder, and the answer is less foreign than you might expect. They talked about each other, of course, who had married, who had quarrelled, who had been seen where and with whom, the eternal warm currency of human company. Gossip is not a modern invention, it is one of the oldest pleasures there is, and a grand London evening ran on it the way an engine runs on coal. They talked about the news which reached them slowly and unevenly, carried in newspapers and letters and the mouths of travellers, news of the king and the court, news of the distant war and the still more distant colonies, news of the great wide world that London sat at the centre of, and yet learned about always a little late. A merchant ship lost, a minister fallen, a new fashion arrived from Paris despite everything. The price of this, the scandal of that. It is worth dwelling, just for a breath, on how slowly the world arrived to these people, because it shaped how they lived in it. News from the far side of the country might take days to reach them, and news from across the ocean, from the American colonies that were so much in the air in these years, took weeks carried by ship, so that by the time London read of an event, it might be long over, and the people involved already moved on or dead. They lived inside a kind of delay we can hardly imagine, the present always partly hidden from them, the world always reaching them as an echo. And yet they did not feel it as a lack, because they had never known anything else. The slowness was simply the texture of being alive, and there was a peace in it, perhaps, that our own instant and unceasing flood of news has taken from us. They could not know everything at once. So they knew instead what reached them, and they talked it over by candlelight, and let the rest of the globe arrive when it would. They talked about the things persons of cultivation were expected to discuss, books and pictures and the playhouse, the latest poem, the newest singer, the actor everyone was going to see. To hold your own in such talk was a kind of admission ticket to this world, and the cleverer guests sparkled at it, and the duller ones nodded along, exactly as at any gathering you have ever attended. And underneath all of it ran the deeper, quieter conversations that any party throws up if it lasts long enough. The old friend confiding a worry, the two people discovering, with a small private shock, that they understand each other. The lonely guest grateful, simply to be in the warmth and the light and the noise, asking for nothing more than not to be alone tonight. These conversations leave no record. No history book holds them. But they were the true substance of the evening, then as now, and the gold and the music were only ever the setting for them. And who are they? Exactly this company we have been moving among all night, these faces in the candlelight. It is worth pausing to look at them as a whole, because the guests at an evening like this were not gathered at random. A great family's party was a kind of portrait of their world, and you could read in the chamber exactly who they were and where they stood. There would be the other great nobles, of course, the dukes and earls and their wives, the family's true equals, come to see the famous new house, and to be seen seeing it, measuring it against their own, paying the visit that rank required. Among the highest people in the land, society was a small and watchful village, everyone known to everyone, every alliance and every coolness noted, and an evening like this was where the village assembled. There would be the men of affairs, the rising politicians and the seasoned ones, for a place this close to the palace was never far from power, and a good deal of the real governing of the country was done, not in any chamber, but in rooms exactly like these, over wine, in quiet corners, between people who had known each other all their lives. A word here, an understanding reached there, and the course of the kingdom might shift a degree, and no record would ever show where it happened. There would be the clever ones, the wits and the talkers, the writers and the artists, and the men who had seen the world, invited because they were entertaining, because a great hostess knew that a party needs sparkle as much as it needs rank, and that the cleverest commoner could light up a space full of dull grandees. To be amusing was its own kind of passport into this world, and some rose far on it. There would be the beauties, the young women newly out in society, watched and discussed and weighed, and the young men circling them, and all the delicate machinery of courtship turning quietly beneath the surface of the evening. There would be the ambitious newcomers, not quite of this world yet, hoping to be drawn into it, studying everything, learning the rules. And there would be the old friends, the people the family simply liked, the ones who were here for warmth rather than advantage, and who were, in the end, the reason a night was a pleasure and not merely a duty. Look at them all together, in the warm shifting light, and you are looking at a whole society in miniature. It's powerful, and it's clever, and it's lovely, and it's hopeful, gathered into a few bright rooms for a few hours, for performing and conversing and watching one another, exactly as people have always done and always will. The clothes would change, the rooms would change, but the gathering itself, that deep human pull toward warmth and company, and being among one's own kind on a cold night, that has not changed at all, and you understand it as well as any of them, because you are doing it too, in your way, even now. Let us leave the talk to murmur on, and let me take you to the windows, because the contrast there is one I do not want you to miss. The chambers behind us are all warmth and light and human voices, but press close to the cold glass of one of the tall windows, and look out, and you will see the other half of the truth of this night. Out there is the dark. Green Park lies below and beyond, a wide spread of unlit blackness in the heart of the city, and on a winter night like this one it is genuinely dark in a way. Our cities have almost forgotten how to be. There are no lamps strung across it. There is no glow on the clouds. There is only the faint paleness of frost on the grass, where a little light from the mansion reaches it, and past that, nothing. A depth of black that could be 10 yards deep or 10 miles. Somewhere in that darkness the cattle are still there, settled now, breathing, invisible. The park is half countryside still, grazed and rural, and standing at this window, you are looking out from one of the most sophisticated interiors in Europe directly into something close to open field. The city and the wild press right up against each other here, divided only by a pane of glass and a few feet of frozen air. Oh dear. The family has a particular fondness for that shadowed green space below, and a particular arrangement with it too, which is worth knowing. The ground the house overlooks belongs to the crown, to the king himself. But the residents of this favoured little street have been granted the right to lease a strip of it, to take a piece of the royal park and make of it a private garden, walled and planted, an extension of the house out into the green. It is the kind of privilege that money and rank could obtain in this world, and nothing else could. A private slice of the king's own park, and it speaks volumes about exactly where the Spencers stood that they could have it. Tonight, in the dead of winter and the dead of the dark, the garden is only a deeper patch of black among the rest, sleeping under the frost, waiting for a spring that feels very far away. But it is there, just below the family's own green secret pressed up against the royal park, and on a summer evening it would be the loveliest place in the whole property, scented and cool and private, with the grand house glowing at your back and the park stretching away in front. Let yourself imagine that summer garden for a moment as a kind of antidote to the cold pressing on the glass. The long light evenings of June, when the sun does not set until very late and the sky stays pale for hours afterward. The scent of the flowers the family would have planted, roses and stocks and night-scented things that give up their perfume only after dark. The cool of the grass, the soft sounds of the city held at a distance, the swifts screaming high overhead in the last of the light. To step out of the warm chambers on such an evening into your own private corner of a royal park, with no one to see you and nothing to do, would be one of the quiet, perfect pleasures that all this wealth could buy. It is waiting down there now, under the frost, holding all its summers in reserve. Turn from the window now, and feel how the warmth of the space takes you back the instant you step away from the cold glass. That, in the end, is the whole emotional engine of a winter evening like this one, and perhaps of the whole idea of home itself. The dark and the cold are real, and they are right there, just on the other side of the glass, never further away than that. And you are not out in them. You are in here, in the light, in the warmth, among the voices, that the darkness outside is not the enemy of the comfort within. It is what makes the comfort mean anything at all. I want to spend a little while now on two things that you have been steeped in all evening without quite noticing them, because they are so constant that they have become invisible to you, the way the most important things often are, the warmth and the light. We take both so utterly for granted now that it is genuinely difficult to feel how hard won they once were, and how much of the beauty of this house depends entirely on them. Begin with the heat, and with the fires that make it. Every grand room in this house has its fireplace, and most of them are blazing tonight, and behind every one of those cheerful hearths stands a quantity of labour and expense that would astonish a modern guest. The coal has been carted in and carried down and hauled up and stacked. The fires have been laid and lit and tended since the afternoon by servants who do little else through the cold months, but keep the fine house from freezing, moving from chamber to chamber with their scuttles and their tongs, building each fire up, raking it through, banking it down, never letting any of them die. A house this size, in a London winter, is an endless quiet war against the cold, and the war is fought by people you mostly never see. The marble and the stone that make the spaces so beautiful also make them bitterly chill when the hearths go dead, and so the fires are very rarely allowed to die, not in the interiors that matter, not in the season that matters. The warmth that wrapped around you so kindly when you first came in from the park is not a happy accident. It is the product of weeks and months of fuel and labour, a comfort manufactured at real cost and offered to you as though it were nothing. And there is a particular pleasure in a living fire that we have half forgotten, sitting as we mostly do now beside heat that comes from nowhere visible, makes no sound. A coal fire is alive. It shifts and settles and collapses softly in on itself. It throws a moving, reddish glow up the front of anyone who stands near it, and it gives off its heat unevenly, in waves, so that one side of you roasts while the other stays cool, and you turn yourself before it like meat on a spit. And there is something deeply animal and deeply ancient in that turning, something our ancestors did in caves and we still feel the pull of. The people in these chambers tonight are warmed in the oldest way there is, and so, in your imagination, are you, now the light, which is the greater marvel of the two, and the one this whole house was built to show off. Everything you have admired tonight, every gleam of gold, each glow of silk, every picture waking on the wall, a face turned toward you in conversation, you have seen by the light of burning flame and by nothing else. There is no other source of brightness here. When the flames die, the dark is total. And so the management of illumination, the making and placing and tending of all those small fires, is one of the central arts of running a noble house, and one of its great hidden expenses. Consider, for a moment, only the candles. The best of them, the ones burning in the grand interiors tonight, are made of beeswax, and beeswax is costly, and it burns clean and bright, and with a faint sweet scent of honey. The cheaper sort, made of rendered animal fat, of tallow, are what burn below stairs and in the servants' quarters, and they smoke, and they smell, and they gutter, and no guest in the grand spaces would ever be shown such a thing. The simple difference between wax and tallow ran like a fault line straight through the whole society. The rich burned honey, the poor burned fat. You could tell exactly where you stood in the world by the quality of the light you were allowed to see by. And there are so many of them. A great room lit for an evening like this swallows candles by the hundred, in the branched fixtures hanging overhead, in the sconces along the walls, in the candlesticks on every table. Each one must be made, and stored, and set in place, and lit at the right hour, and then watched, because a candle is a needy thing. It must be trimmed as it burns, the spent wick clipped, so it does not smoke and dim. It must be replaced as it shortens, before it gutters out and shames the interior. All evening, quietly at the edges of your attention, servants have been doing exactly this, tending the hundreds of wicks the way a gardener tends a great bed of flowers, so that the glow never falters, and you never once have to think about it. Look up now at the fixtures hanging above the company, and notice what the family has done with all this flame, because it is genuinely clever. The candles up there are set in branches of cut crystal and gilded metal, and the crystal is not mere decoration. It is a machine for multiplying light. Each faceted drop catches a flame and breaks it and throws it back 100-fold, so that a few dozen candles become a soft storm of broken brightness scattered across the ceiling, far more radiance than the flames alone could ever give. The Georgians understood, better than we who can simply flip a switch. That light was dear, and that dear things should be made to go as far as they possibly can, and made to look beautiful in the going. And they had one further trick, the cleverest of all, and you can see it on the walls between the windows. Mirrors. Tall sheets of looking glass, set in carved and gilded frames, placed exactly where they will do the most work. For a mirror, in an interior lit by candle, is worth a good many more. It takes the brightness it is given and gives it back, doubling each candle, deepening the salon, opening a whole second glowing chamber on the far side of the glass, where a ghostly party seems to be taking place in perfect step with this one. Stand before one of these tall mirrors as the guests do, and the effect is faintly magical even now. You see the room repeated and extended, the candles doubled into long receding rows, the gold answered by more gold, the whole shining scene given a depth and an infinity it does not really possess. The Spencers did not put these mirrors here merely so their guests could admire themselves, though no doubt their guests did. They put them here to catch and multiply and spread the light, to make the dark winter night retreat that little bit further from the edges of the chamber, to wring every last gleam out of every costly flame. The whole glittering effect of a great Georgian interior at night is, at its heart, an ingenious conspiracy of fire and glass against the night, and the night is always there, waiting, just past the reach of the flames. That is the thing to hold on to as the party deepens and the hour grows late. All this warmth, all this light, all this gold and glass and music is a small bright bubble blown against an enormous surrounding blackness, the dark of the winter, of the night, of the unlit city and the sleeping country beyond it. The people of this age lived much closer to that blackness than we do. They knew, in their bodies, how much work it took to keep it at bay, and perhaps that is why they made their lit rooms so beautiful. When light is cheap and endless, you stop seeing it. When every candle is dear and the dark is real, you learn to make of brightness a kind of art. And that, more than the gold or the marble, is what you have been moving through all evening. An art made out of fire, against the night. And while we are noticing the things that have become invisible through being everywhere, let me draw your attention to a sound, one you have been hearing all evening underneath everything else without once listening to it. The clocks. In the quieter chambers, between the music and the talk, there is a steady, patient ticking, and the way these people lived with time was quite unlike the way we live with it now. A grand house like this would have its clocks, fine ones, long case clocks standing in the halls, and smaller bracket clocks on the mantels, beautiful objects in themselves, made by craftsmen as skilled in their way as the men who gilded the palms. And they were prized because a reliable clock was still something close to a marvel, a piece of precision in a world that mostly told the time by far rougher means. For out beyond these walls, most of the city had no clock of its own at all. People told the hour by the sun when there was sun, and by the deep bells of the London churches when there was not, the bells ringing out across the rooftops to mark the passing of the day for everyone within hearing, whether they owned a timepiece or not. Stand at a window on a still night and you might hear them, the bells of 100 churches across the dark city, not quite together, each parish keeping its own slightly different time, a soft, uneven chorus drifting over the roofs. And here is the thing I find most worth holding on to. There was no agreed, exact, shared clock the way we have now. Your clock and your neighbour's clock might differ by minutes, and no one minded much, because nothing in life demanded that they agree. There were no trains to catch to the minute, no appointments timed to the second, no sense that the hours were a resource being spent and that one might be falling behind. Time was looser, it was softer, it flowed rather than ticked. A night like this one had no fixed end. It would go on as long as it went on, until the company thinned of its own accord, and the hour felt late and people drifted home when they were ready and not before. No one was watching a clock to know when to leave. They left when the evening was over, and the night was over when it felt over. And that is a freedom we have very nearly lost. I think that looseness of time is part of what we are really reaching for on a night like this, when we let ourselves sink back into a slower age. Not the gold, not the silk, not even the warmth, but the deep unhurriedness of it, the sense of an evening that answers to nothing but itself, that will end when it ends and not a moment sooner. Let the clocks tick on in the still interiors. They are not counting anything down. They are only keeping the household gentle company through the long evening, the way they have kept us company, unnoticed, all this while. Let yourself simply breathe for a moment, here in the middle of the gathering, because the air of a noble house like this on a night like this is a whole world in itself, and it is one of the things that no painting and no plan can ever give you. We can see them in pictures, we can read about the food and the music, but the smell of the evening is gone forever, except as we rebuild it now, together, in the imagination, and it is worth rebuilding, because it would have been the first thing to greet you and the last thing you forgot. Underneath everything there is the sweetness of beeswax, from all those hundreds of burning candles, and from the polish worked into every surface of wood in the place, a warm, faintly honeyed scent that means, more than anything else, money and care. Woven through it is wood smoke and coal smoke from the fires, never harsh in these well-drawn rooms but always present, the smell of warmth being made, and riding over both as the evening goes on, the richer smells of the supper that has been and gone, roasted meat and wine and spice lingering in the heavy fabrics and the still air. Then there are the people themselves, and the measures they have taken to smell sweet, because washing was a rarer business in this age than in ours, and scent was called upon to do a good deal of work. There is the powder in the hair, often perfumed. There are the pomades and the waters and the little bottles dabbed at wrist and throat, rose and orange flower and lavender and stranger essences, musk and ambergris brought from far away. A crowded chamber of fashionable people was a dense and complicated thing to the nose, sweet and heavy and human all at once, and a sensitive guest learned simply not to think about it too closely. And somewhere, even in the dead of winter, there are flowers. A place at this level would contrive to have them, forced in glass houses or kept against the cold, set in arrangements about the grander spaces, lending their fresh living scent to all the wax and smoke and powder. The whole air of the party, then, is layered and shifting, a thing you move through rather than merely breathe, and if you could be set down in this space with your eyes shut, you would know at once, from the air alone, that you were somewhere rich and warm and full of people and far from the cold, dark street outside. And of all the senses, smell is the one that fastens hardest onto memory, the one that can carry you back years later to a single evening in a single room with a force that sight and sound cannot match. For the people here tonight, the particular smell of this mansion, the beeswax and the wood smoke and the wine and the flowers and the warm press of company, would become, in time, the very scent of an evening among friends, of warmth and belonging and welcome. Years hence, An old guest catching some chance trace of beeswax and smoke on a winter night might find themselves, for an instant, back here, young again, in the candlelight, among faces long gone. We cannot smell it ourselves, across all this distance, but we can know that it was there, rich and particular and unrepeatable, and that it bound this night into the memories of everyone who breathed it, more deeply than they ever knew. It is getting late now. You can feel it in the space before any clock confirms it. The first sharp brightness of the evening has mellowed into something lower and softer. The candles have burned down by a third or more, and though servants have been replacing them all night, there is a different quality to the light now, a settledness, a sense of a fire that has found its steady heart. The voices are quieter than they were. The laughter, when it comes, is warmer and less performed. The night has shed its earlier nervousness, and the ones who remain are the people who are truly comfortable here, and they have stopped trying. This is my favourite hour of any long evening, and I suspect it may be yours too. The hour when the party stops being an event and becomes simply a gathering of people who are glad, for their own various reasons, not to have gone home yet. Some of the guests have already slipped away, called their carriages, returned to the cold. The crush has eased. The rooms feel larger and gentler, and in this softened, late golden hour, with the music drifting and the fires settling, the master and mistress of the building do something that we, alone among all the company, are going to be allowed to follow. They slip away, quietly, without ceremony, the way hosts can sometimes leave their own party for a few minutes when it has reached the point of running itself. They go up to a smaller floor above the stately chambers, to a room that no general guest would ever be shown on a night like this, a chamber kept private, kept apart, kept for themselves. And because you have been with me all evening, and because this, in truth, is the whole reason I brought you here, we are going to go up after them. Come quietly. We are about to see the heart of this place. The interior we come to is not large. After the soaring scale of the chambers below, after the great room with its reigning chandeliers and its crowd, this interior feels small enough to put your arms around, and that smallness is the first and most important thing about it. It was never meant to hold a crowd. It was meant to hold two people, and the love between them, and very little else. This is the painted room, and it is the most beautiful room in the mansion, and the most personal, and the one that the whole of the rest of the house has, in a sense, been leading up to all along. Let your eyes adjust to it, here in the quieter candlelight of this upper floor. There is no gold blazing at you the way it did downstairs. Instead, every surface, the walls, the panels, the spaces between, is painted delicately and exquisitely, in soft and glowing colours, with figures and garlands and slender ornament, the whole interior turned into a single continuous work of painting. It is one of the earliest rooms of its kind in all of Europe, and the people who made it knew they were doing something new. The painted decoration was inspired by a discovery that had set all of cultivated Europe alight in these very years. Far away to the south, in Italy, the buried Roman towns of Pompeii and Herculaneum were being dug out of the ground, towns that had lain sealed under volcanic ash since the ancient world, their walls still bright with painting after 17 centuries in the dark. For the first time, people of this age could see, with their own eyes, how the Romans had actually decorated the spaces they lived in. And here, in a quiet upper room in London, that ancient buried beauty has been brought back up into the light and made new, but the antiquity is only the surface of it. Look closer, and you find that the real subject of this room, woven through every panel and figure, is a single thing. It is love. The whole chamber is a celebration of devotion, and not affection in the abstract, but one particular love, the bond between the man and the woman who built this house and who have just come up here ahead of us to be alone in it for a little while. The figures on the walls tell stories of devotion and union and tenderness, the old myths of lovers drawn from the ancient world, arranged and chosen so that the salon reads, to anyone who can follow it, as a long and lovely poem in praise of married happiness. There are not many rooms in the world that were built to say one thing this clearly, and the thing this chamber was built to say is simply, we love each other, and we have made this beautiful place to hold the saying of it. Let your eye travel slowly over it all in the soft light. There is none of the shout of the interiors downstairs here, none of the blaze of gold, none of the scale meant to impress a crowd. Everything is fine and delicate and quiet and close. The colours are gentle, the figures small and graceful, the whole space scaled to the human and the intimate rather than to the public and the grand. It is the difference between a great proclamation and a whispered word, and after a whole evening of proclamations, the whisper of this space reaches something the grander chambers could not touch. This is a space you could imagine actually living in, which is more than can be said for the magnificent halls below. You could sit here of a night, the two of you with a single branch of candles and a small fire, and read or talk or simply be quiet together, surrounded on every side by painted reminders of why you chose each other. It is an interior built not to be shown but to be inhabited by two particular people in the long ordinary evenings of a shared life, and that is the rarest thing of all in a house designed so completely for display. And now I will show you the secret I promised you at the very beginning of the gathering, when we were still standing out in the cold and dark. Look above the fireplace. There, set into the painted decoration over the chimney piece, is a long horizontal panel, a frieze painted in the manner of an ancient fresco. It is a copy of a real Roman painting, a fragment that had survived from the 1st century after Christ, one of the most famous surviving paintings of the entire ancient world. And the scene it shows, the scene these two people chose, above all others, to set in the place of honour over the hearth of their most private room, is a wedding. A quiet wedding. Not a grand public ceremony with crowds and trumpets, but an intimate, almost solemn gathering of a few figures, attending a bride. And in the age when this interior was made, that ancient fresco was believed to show something very particular. It was believed to show a wedding conducted in secret. Now hold in your mind what you already know about the two people standing in this room. That before the ceremony their families had arranged, they had quietly married each other in private first, for no one's sake but their own. They had wed once for the world, but before that, and in truth, they had wed once for themselves. And here, years later, in the most intimate room of the most beautiful house they would ever build, over the fireplace they would sit beside on 1,000 quiet evenings like this one. They had a painting of a secret wedding set into the wall. It is, almost certainly, a private message, a reference, hidden in plain sight, to their own secret marriage, a thing that the hundreds of guests downstairs would walk past if they ever saw it at all, and admire only as a fine antique copy, never guessing what it meant. But the two of them knew, every time they came into this chamber, that they knew. That is the secret written into the plaster. That is the room I promised to bring you to. It is not a hidden passage or a buried treasure. It is something far quieter and far rarer than that. It is a married couple, immensely rich, able to build literally anything they could imagine, choosing to take the deepest and most private truth of their lives, the memory of the day they belonged to each other before anyone else knew, and paint it into the wall of a room where they could keep it close forever, in a language only they could fully read. I find I have to sit with that for a moment every time, and perhaps you do too. We have spent the whole evening admiring the wealth of this house, the gold and the silk and the marble and the pictures, the staggering expense of it all, the sheer power that built it, and it all comes down, in the end, to this. A small room, a painting of a quiet wedding over the fire, two people who loved each other and wanted a place to keep that love that would outlast them. The gold downstairs is for the world. This room is the truth. The chamber is furnished simply for its size, with chairs and settees made especially for it, designed to belong here and nowhere else. It is a chamber to sit in, two together, when the grand evening downstairs has worn itself out, when the guests have gone and the candles are burning low, when the public day of an earl and his countess is finally over, and they are only, once more, that the young couple who fell in love against all the sensible advice of their world, and married each other twice for the joy of it. Stand in the doorway with me, and do not go in, because they are in there now, the two of them, in our imagining, sitting quietly together in the painted room they made, in the soft remaining light, with the murmur of their own party still rising faintly from the floors below. We will not intrude on them. We have seen what we came to see. We have found the space where they kept their secret, and we have understood, at last, what the whole shimmering house was really built to hold. Let's go back down now, softly, and leave them to it. The evening is moving toward its end, and there is a particular beauty in the way a great night winds down that I would not have you miss. Come. The candles are lower on the stairs than they were when we climbed up, and the house is beginning, room by room, to let the evening go. By the time we come back down into the main chambers, the party has turned. You can feel it at once. There are fewer people than there were. Them that earlier held a warm crush of company now hold only scattered groups, and the spaces between them have opened up, and the grand chambers are beginning, very gently, to remember that they are mostly empty most of the time. This is the long, slow ebb of a lavish evening, and it has its own particular beauty, quite different from the bright flood of its beginning. One by one, and then in twos and threes, the guests are taking their leave. A word to the host, a word to the hostess, a bow, a curtsy, a last exchange in a doorway, and then they are gone, drawn back toward the cold and the dark and their own beds across the sleeping city. There is an art to leaving too, as there was an art to arriving. To go too early was to seem to have somewhere better to be, or to have not enjoyed oneself, a small insult to one's hosts. To stay too late was to outstay one's welcome, to be among the lingerers the servants were quietly longing to see gone. The well-bred guest judged the moment finely, leaving when the evening was full but not yet faded, with a last warm word that said, without saying it, that this had been a fine night and a kindness, and would be remembered. And the hosts, however tired, summoned a fresh warmth for each leaving guest, because the farewell was the last taste of the night and the one that lingered. Down at the front of the place, the whole business of departure has its own quiet machinery. A servant is sent to find a particular carriage among the many still waiting in the cold street. The horses, which have stood patient and steaming for hours, are roused. The linkboys light their torches again, ready to walk ahead of those who came on foot, or whose carriages wait a little way off. Cloaks are fetched from the warm side chamber where they have lain all evening, and wrapped once more around shoulders that have grown used to the heat of the spaces, and now flinch at the thought of the night outside. And then the door opens, and for each departing guest there is that same shock in reverse that you felt on arriving. The warmth and the light and the music are suddenly behind them, and ahead is the cold breath of the winter park, the dark street, the long ride home through a city gone almost entirely to sleep. The bright bubble of the gathering releases them, one by one, back into the ordinary night, and the door closes behind each of them, and the building grows a little quieter with every closing. Picture the ride home, because it was nothing like ours. A carriage at night in this London, is a small dark box on wheels, unheated, jolting over rough and frozen streets. The only light the swaying lamps at its corners and whatever the moon and the linkboys provide. A guest going home wraps deeper into a cloak, watches the dark fronts of the sleeping houses slide past the window, feels the cold creeping back into hands and feet that the great fires had thawed and carries with them. Against all that black and cold, the warmth of the evening just past, the music still sounding faintly in memory, the gold still glowing behind closed eyes. The evening goes with them, even as this place lets them go. And there is a sweetness in that homeward chill that the warm interiors could not give. For it is on the ride back, alone or nearly so, jolting through the night, that the party settles into something you can hold, turning from noise and light into memory even as it recedes. The mind goes back over it, the face that was kind, the thing that was said, the music, the supper, the warmth, all of it already softening into the gentle gold of a good night remembered. We have all had that ride home in one carriage or another, across whatever centuries. The pleasure of an evening is one thing while you are inside it, and another, quieter, deeper thing on the way back, when it is over and safe and yours, and the cold outside only makes the warmth you are carrying feel more truly your own. Back inside, the chambers are emptying in earnest now, and the mansion begins to do something I find quietly moving to watch. It begins to close itself down for the night, and the closing of a grand house after a grand evening is a long and careful ritual, performed almost entirely by the people you have not been meant to see all night, the servants, who have one more great labour ahead of them before they can rest. It begins with the candles. All evening, the flames have been tended and fed and replaced, so that the light never faltered. Now, room by room, that long care goes quietly into reverse. As the last guests leave each room, a servant moves through it, and one by one the candles go out. Some are snuffed with a little cone-shaped tool that smothers the flame without smoke, some are pinched, and with each one extinguished a small pool of the evening's brightness vanishes, and the dark that has waited all night just past the windows is allowed to come a little further into the interior. There is something almost ceremonial in it, this snuffing of the lights, though no one performing, it thinks of it that way. To them it is simply the end of a long shift. But watch a grand gilded one go dark, flame by flame, the gold dimming as the light leaves it, the painted figures on the walls sinking back into shadow, the mirrors that all evening multiplied the brightness, now multiplying only the growing dark. And you are watching something close to the opposite of creation, the night being unmade in the same careful order it was made, the bright world folding itself away until next time. Let yourself follow it, slowly, as a way of letting the gathering go. One candle, and then the next, and then the next. The pool of brightness around each one, shrinking to a point, and then vanishing. The salon growing larger and dimmer and quieter with each small extinction, the warmth still in the air but the brightness draining away, the corners filling first with shadow and then with proper blackness. There is no sadness in it, not really. It is only the natural close of things, the same close that comes to every gathering and every day and every evening that has ever been. The light was beautiful while it burned, and now, gently, candle by candle, it is time for it to rest, and for the room to rest, and soon for you to rest as well. The fires are not put out, not entirely. They are banked instead, raked down and covered, so that they will smoulder low through the night and be easy to wake in the morning, a few embers kept alive in the grey ash like a memory of the blaze. The noble chambers cool slowly. The warmth that took a whole afternoon to build begins, the moment it is no longer fed, to seep away into the stone and the winter, and by the dead middle of the night, these spaces that were tropical with heat will be cold enough to see your breath. The silver is gathered and counted and carried down to be washed and locked away. The fine glasses are collected. The remains of the supper are cleared. The chairs are set back into their proper places against the walls, where they will stand, ready and unused, until the next lavish evening calls them out again. The steward goes through his rooms with his lights and his keys, checking, securing, accounting, the last responsible mind awake in the public part of the house, making sure that all is safe before he too can think of his bed. And down below, in the kitchens that roared so fiercely at the start of our evening, the great heat is dying. The spits have stopped turning. The fires are low. The cook, who held the whole storm together for so many hours, is finally still sitting, perhaps for the first time since dawn, while the youngest and most junior of the servants face the last and least loved task of all, the mountain of washing, the scouring of the copper and the pewter and the endless plates. The work that follows every feast and that no one ever thanks anyone for. Spare them a last thought, those weary servants, as the house quiets around them. They were the first awake in this house this morning, long before the winter sun, and they will be the last to lie down tonight, and tomorrow it will begin again. Their beds are at the very top of the place, under the roof. Small plain rooms are whirled away from the painted splendour below, and they will climb the back stairs to them by the light of a cheap tallow candle, in the cold, when the work is finally done. They gave the evening its grace, and the evening will never know their names. And there is a whole quiet ocean of lives like theirs holding up every beautiful thing that has ever been made. We will let them find their rest. They have earned it more than anyone. And now the building is nearly silent. The guests are gone. The candles in the stately chambers are out. Walk with me, in the imagination, through these darkened rooms one last time, because there is a particular and tender beauty in a noble house emptied of its evening, and few people ever get to see it. The great room, that vast, bright space that held the whole crush of fashionable London a few hours ago, stands dark and still. The chandeliers hang cold and unlit overhead. The pictures are only deeper shapes of dark against the dark walls now. The painted faces of the family's ancestors gone back into the shadow, they will keep until morning. The chairs stand in their patient rows. The great room dreams, if rooms can dream, of the light and the company it was made for, and waits with the endless patience of architecture for it to come again. There is a particular stillness to a great room emptied of its evening that I find more beautiful, in its way, than the party itself. All night the chamber was full of light and noise, and the press of bodies, for performing its purpose, being what it was built to be. And now it is simply itself, in the dim with no one to admire it, and no one to impress, holding the faint warmth and the faint scent of the gathering that has gone. A fine mansion, like a person, is perhaps most truly itself in these unwatched hours, when the performance is over and there is no one left to perform for. The spaces breathe out, they settle, they keep, in the shadow, the memory of the light, and wait for morning with a patience we cannot imagine, because they will outlast us all. The gilded grove of the palm room is unlit too, the gold that danced so wildly in the candlelight now, only a faint gleam where a little stray gleam from somewhere reaches it, the painted leaves still, the goddess in her dome invisible. The library, where the master keeps his books and his truest self, sits quiet, the small fire banked to embers, the leather and the old paper waiting in the dark. And up above, in the painted room with its secret over the fire, the two people who built all this have long since taken their own light and gone through to their bed, leaving the painted lovers on the walls to keep their vigil through the night, as they have every night since the paint dried, as they will for centuries to come. For the family too must sleep, the same as the lowest servant under the roof, and the same as you and I. However grand this place, however gilded the interiors, the night comes for everyone in it equally, and asks the same simple thing of all of them, that they lie down and close their eyes and let the day go. So picture the last lights of the mansion climbing the stairs, each member of the family taking up a single candle from the table at the foot of the staircase, carrying that one small flame up through the darkened house to their own room, the little pool of brightness moving up the stairs and along the passages, and then, at last, into a bedchamber where a fire has been lit hours ago against exactly this moment, so that the space is warm and waiting. There is a particular tenderness in that small carried flame that I would not have you miss, for it is how everyone in this age went to bed, the greatest earl and the humblest maid alike. You did not flood a space with brightness at the turn of a switch. You took up your own small candle, and you guarded it with a cupped hand against the draughts on the stairs, and you walked slowly, because to walk quickly was to put it out, and you climbed up through a place that was almost entirely dark around the little island of light you carried. There was no glow from another room to guide you, no soft brightness spilling from anywhere. There was only your own little flame, and the few steps it showed you, and the dark pressing close on every side. It made going to bed a slow and deliberate thing, a brief nightly journey out of the lit and waking world into the dark and sleeping one, and it made the bed when you reached it, and the fire waiting in the grate, feel like a true arrival, a harbour gained. We have lost that, with all our easy light. We go to bed quickly now, and the blackness is never quite complete, and there is no small flame to carry and guard and watch. But for these people, and for almost everyone who ever lived before this last short stretch of history, the journey to bed was exactly this: a candle in the hand, a slow climb through the gloom, and then the warmth of the waiting chamber at the end of it. There are far worse ways to be brought to sleep. The children are already deep asleep, 2 floors up, and have been for hours, having never known that anything unusual was happening below them at all, only that the house was full of that warm, distant murmur that means the grown world is awake and all is well. The little girl who will grow into the most celebrated woman in England sleeps with no notion of any of it, of the fame or the brilliance or the years ahead of her, only a child in a warm bed in her father's beautiful house on an ordinary winter night that was, to her, no different from any other. And the great house holds them all in the dark, the Earl and his Countess in the painted heart of it, the children under the roof, the servants higher still, the banked fires breathing their slow warmth into the cooling rooms, the gold sleeping, the pictures sleeping, the music gone, the guests scattered to their own beds across the city, the cattle settled in the black park outside, and over all of it the deep, complete, unlit dark of a London winter night, pressing gently against every window, asking nothing now but rest. The whole shining evening has folded itself away, the way every evening does, the way this one does for us too, now, as we come to the end of the few hours we have spent together inside it. The house will wake tomorrow and do it all again, the fires laid, the candles set, the silver polished, the long slow building of another evening of warmth and light against the night. But for tonight, it sleeps, and so, very soon, will you. Before you do, let me say only this, as gently as I can, because I would not break the quiet of the place to say it. The people we walked among tonight were real. The Earl and his Countess and their love and their secret wedding, and the interior they painted to hold it, all of that is true, drawn from what is genuinely known of them, and the building itself still stands, much as we have walked through it. The guests we moved among, the particular faces and conversations of this one imagined evening, I have gathered and reconstructed from all that is known of how such nights were lived, so that you and I could have an evening to share. If you would like to spend another night like this one, in another house, in a distant age, you are always welcome to come back, and I will leave a light on for you. There is no hurry. The past is patient, and it is not going anywhere, and neither am I. For now, though, there is nothing left for you to do, and nowhere you need to be, and no part of the day still asking anything of you. This place is dark, the fires are low, the evening is over, and it was beautiful, and you were here for it, and now you can let it go. Sleep well, stay warm, be kind to the people in your house, and I will see you in the next one. Good night.